Good evening, everybody. Go ahead and call the meeting to order and welcome you to the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 Board Meeting for October 7th, 2019. Would the gentlemen please remove their hats and everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, well, good evening, and again, thank you for being here with us tonight. Before we get going, I just want to introduce our participants up front here for you. I'll start at my far right with Miss Lynn Town, our clerk of the board, and Dr. Steve Cook, our superintendent. To my immediate left is Miss Lisa May, our vice chair, Miss Tamber Pickford, trustee, Miss Jen Brumley, trustee. My name's Casey Morserow, and I'm the board chair. Over that way, we've got an empty seat that used to be occupied by Trustee Tom Hearn. If you hadn't heard, Trustee Hearn resigned a few weeks ago. He moved out of the district and so was no longer able to serve. We are accepting applications for that for 2 more weeks to fill that position. So if you're interested in that, you can contact Ms. Town via email or look on the district website. Public comment on district-related items is scheduled near the start of the meeting. Please sign in on the sheet provided at the entrance door. Because of the diversity of issues, members of the board will not respond to public comment made during tonight's meeting. Instead, issues may be recorded and referred to the proper staff person for follow-up. Comments may also be submitted to the board in writing through our clerk. Okay, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Ms. Town, I need to vote on this and then do the amendment, is that right? Okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And then is there a motion to amend the agenda? We need to add an addendum for consent agenda item F. That was a quote for equipment that is time sensitive and the service is needed to save money over at Lake City High School. And it's some sound equipment, I believe, that they're currently having to rent some stuff because their sound equipment went out over there.
I was just curious which budget that was going to come out of, building budget or?
Okay. So I need to get a motion to approve the amended agenda? Or
A motion to amend the agenda.
Okay.
So moved. Second.
thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And now a motion to approve the amended agenda, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the amended agenda? Oh, man. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Jeez. That was a tricky way to start.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
testing you.
All right, Dr. Cook, I'm going to turn it over to you for our board recognition.
All right, tonight we're recognizing a community organization that in a few short years has grown into a leading champion of our students and teachers and an enthusiastic partner with Coeur d'Alene Public Schools. So could we please have all board members who are present of the Coeur d'Alene Educational Partnership? It's just always been CEP, so let's get everybody up here. Up top. Come on, Casey, get up there. All right. Coeur d'Alene Educational Partnership was founded in 2012 by parents, business leaders, and community members. This independent nonprofit partnership is driven by the belief that every student in our district deserves a public education of the highest quality. CEP's vision is for all students to be provided a safe learning environment where they can be engaged, challenged, and empowered to become educated, productive citizens in careers of their choice. Here are some of the primary ways CEP is realizing its vision. A monthly award to celebrate our elementary teachers who exemplify the district's mission. An annual State of the District Forum to ensure the community is informed of current and key issues. An annual fundraiser supporting our school libraries, formerly known as Disco Inferno. And now known as book clubbing, this flagship event has raised nearly $120,000 over 5 years for our underfunded school libraries. CEP collaborates with the Chamber Education Committee, participating in events such as the Chamber's new Teacher Welcome and the Scholarship Upbeat Breakfast. CEP also works with Coeur d'Alene Public Schools to recruit community businesses, professionals, and nonprofit agencies to serve as mentors for students through the Coeur d'Alene Connects online portal. These mentor relationships are key to guiding middle and high school students towards social and emotional well-being and successful work and career paths. So let me read this certificate. Somebody better get ready to talk to because I'm going to hand this mic over in a second. So. Yeah, Steve's not shy. I'm sure he'll. All right, Coeur d'Alene Educational Partnership. The Board of Trustees is deeply grateful for the ongoing support of the Coeur d'Alene Educational Partnership in uniting our community around the importance of quality public education. CEP is a strong advocate for the students and teachers in Coeur d'Alene Public Schools, as demonstrated each year with elementary teacher recognitions, the State of the District Forum, fundraising for our libraries, and recruitment for community members. We salute CEP's mission and dedication to investing in our children. Let's give them a wonderful round of applause for their commitment. I'm going to give you the certificate. Just a second. There you go. But now you can't hold the mic, so I'm going to ask you, the last 5 years, right? 5 years. So 5 years. Give me just some of the highlights, how this has been transformative, and what are the things that you guys have delivered and been a part of as a partnership with the district?
Well, I'll just start it. The most fun for me has been going into the elementary schools, visiting with the kids and presenting the elementary librarians with books. And the kids get lit up pretty good because they get to take those books home. So that's a fun time.
Just being able to get the school librarians a way to fill the needs that they see in their school. I have no idea. Thank you.
I think informing the community through events like the sponsoring the State of the District and the candidate forums is really important.
The work that we're doing with Coeur d'Alene Connects, I think, is really cool and important, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
One of the things we do that's a little behind the scenes is a focus group in the community a couple times a year, and it's been neat for me to see the different voices come forward as we're kind of hosting question and answer, digging into what people are concerned about in our community.
And I'm brand new to the board, actually working as an at-large liaison for the Coeur d'Alene Connects, and I'm really excited that I get to be working with these quality people.
I just add that one of the things I think that really matters is that this is a partnership, and that there's a lot to be said with just the fact that we can talk with this group and brainstorm ways and ideas for how the betterment of the district could continue in any possible means. And that's just something that's truly valued, because not everybody wants to be a partner, because it's hard work. It is hard work. One more round of applause. Let's thank these guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for all you do.
Well, we got one thing. We want to do the fundraiser.
Yes, just a quick plug.
Coeur d'Alene would like to speak.
Quick plug, we will be having our annual book clubbing event on October 19th, 6 p.m. at the Eagles Lodge. Yes, I wrote it all down, and then, of course, I blank. Please come if you're able. It's a fun evening. This year's focus is Alice in Wonderland for our theme, so it'll be fun.
So you can come dressed up at Cheshire Cat or the Mad Hatter, or you can just come in like Black Cocktail. We'd love to have you there.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Great job. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, moving on here, board comments. We didn't have anyone signed up. I just want to, well, board comments, I'm doing first. Thank you. I do just want to mention again, Trustee Hearn, who's not here with us, and in my 4.5 years on the board, this is the first meeting I've been where he hasn't been sitting up here with us. So we didn't get a chance to formally thank him, and we're working on that for next month. So hopefully we'll get Trustee Hearn back in here with us, and we'll show him how much he meant to all of us and how much we appreciate him. So look for that. High school student body reports are next up, and I'm going to start with Venture High School first. Ladies, good evening. And when you go up to the podium, just make sure the red light is on the mic there. There should be a red button for you to push. Perfect, thank you.
Good evening, board members. My name is Trinity Hauk, and this is Brina Hotchin. We go to Venture High School. We're both seniors. This year at Venture High School, we want to strengthen our focus on helping students plan for life after high school. We have created a college and career center where students can explore their post-high school interests. The center offers information, provides assistance in securing entrance into post-secondary education offerings and other job trainings. Amy Haynes is the college and career advisor. She will work with our counselor, Rochelle Smotherman, to help students with goal settings. Together, they will also offer field trips and interest students to help explore and educate them as to the options available once they graduate. Currently scheduled field trips include the following. On October 24th, all Venture students will visit NIC and KTEC. And on November 5th, Spokane College Fair is for all interested juniors and seniors. The Career and Technical Education Department has students working hard to contribute to our community. Students in the industrial technology classes continue to be the source of the names, plates, and room markers for our district. The students are also working to obtain their occupational health and safety advocate certification. The Culinary Arts program has students preparing to work in our hospitality industry by earning safety and sanitary certifications. Currently, 17 students have earned their U of I Foods Handler certifications. 7 students have also earned their Idaho Department of Health and Welfare Management certifications. 2 students are also studying for the National Restaurants Serve Safe certification. November 8th will be the final date for ordering pumpkin rolls. The students' effort produce around 60 pumpkin rolls each year as a fundraiser for class activities, as well as donations to choose local charities. The majority of pumpkin rolls will be made on November 10th. Pumpkin rolls cost $17. Last year's chosen charity included the Second Harvest Food Bank and American Legion. Our leadership class has been working with the media tech students to participate in the National Unity Day on October 23rd. This is an anti-bullying activity focused on kindness, acceptance, and inclusion. Students will participate by wearing orange bandanas and describing the effects bullying has had on their lives. If you enter our school at lunchtime, you will also find an additional anti-bullying project in process, inspired by a book called The Turquoise Table. We will be designing 2 tables with turquoise table runners. Guidelines are sitting at these tables include no cell phones and being willing to visit with others at the table through talking. Leadership students will be managing the tables and to help guide and model the desired behaviors to help make all feel comfortable and included. Also, in the spirit of making all feel comfortable and welcome, we have finally completed the upgrade to the courtyard of our school. 4 metal tables made by KTEC and power-coated black are now in place. The funding for these tables came from the Taz Cafe. The Taz Cafe is a student-run coffee shop run in conjunction in our culinary arts program. The food service internship offered by Ed Ducar and Val Martin. Our students have worked for almost 3 years to raise the funds and pay for these tables. Please stop by our courtyard to see the benefits of our hard work and support of our community and Excel Foundation. It is our calm, enjoyable space. Other upcoming Adventure High School activities include the following. We will have a presentation on vaping on October 10th. This is provided through a partnership with the Panhandle Health. On October 16th, we will be a PSAT testing all freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. Thank you for your support and interest in the amazing opportunities Venture High School continues to provide students. Thank you for providing an opportunity to proudly represent Venture in high school. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent job. Next up, I'm going to have Coeur d'Alene High School go.
Superintendent Cook, Chairman Morrisroe, and esteemed members of the board, I'd like to thank you for having me today. My name is Megan Corrett, and I'm the ASB president at Coeur d'Alene High School. With me today are my vice president, Parker Drexel, and our secretary, Ashley Murphy. Unfortunately, Geneva Bankston couldn't be here with us today. She had soccer practice, but she has been very involved, and she is our treasurer. The last time we met, we were preparing for Senior Start. This event went very smoothly and it was a lot of fun. Our seniors were covered in paint by the end of the day and had big smiles on their faces. It was a really great event, and we will be presenting this at Student Council Regionals, which will be on October 18th. We are preparing right now for Homecoming Week and just the rest of the events that will be coming this following week. Our Homecoming Week theme is We've Got the Beat, so every day correlates to a different song. So today was 80s Workout, tomorrow is Dynamic Duo, and then we have Color Day, Jungle Theme, and then our Blue and White Day. So for example, on Thursday, the song Welcome to the Jungle will correlate with our jungle theme. On Wednesday, we have Powder Puff practice. Each of our classes have been practicing to get ready for that. That's basically, if you don't know, it's girls football, and it's coached by the football players themselves. So that's a lot of fun. Lots of people come to that. Thursday is the Parade on Sherman. Each class has a float that matches the certain genre of music. So for example, the seniors are rock and roll. So every class has been preparing their floats, and we'll have the royalty in that parade. We'd like to invite all of you guys to join us for that on that Thursday. That's at 3:30. And then on Thursday, we also have boys soccer senior night at 5:30, and then at 6:30, we have girls volleyball senior night as well. And then on Friday, we have the homecoming football game, and we play Lewiston. And we will be having the parade at halftime as well to announce the final senior royalty and just the rest of the class royalty as well. And then on Saturday, we have the dance from 7 to 10 in Jordan Court at Coeur d'Alene High School. Upcoming events include on the 18th, we have Student Council Regionals, and we have Christmas Spirit Week, which is our next event at the school, as well as on the 23rd, we'll have School Unity Day, and the seniors are beginning their senior projects. Tomorrow is the first advisor meeting with the seniors, and so everybody's getting ready to mentor with their mentors and to present their projects. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Megan. And next up, Lake City High School.
Good evening, esteemed board chair, honorable trustees, Superintendent Cook, and district administration. My name is Emily Damshin, and I'm the ASB secretary at Lake City High School. With me tonight are my fellow ASB officers, President Jacob Baker, Vice President Sam Putrin, and Treasurer Carter Gordon. We concluded our homecoming week 2 weeks ago, and it was an amazing success. Our student body had such a good time with our spirit days. Our parade featured 30 entries, including royalty, football, our Grand Marshal, first responders, and so many other student groups and organizations. Halftime of the football game, which we won, was highlighted by recognizing our local first responders. a performance by our incredible marching band, and the crowning of our homecoming king and queen. And our homecoming dance on Saturday night was so much fun and featured over 1,000 students from all 3 high schools. We'd like to thank Mr. Mike Nelson for being such an amazing halftime announcer for us again this year. October is a busy month for us as well, with our Coats for Kids drive starting up this week and seniors start next Wednesday. In addition, our student council will be attending the Regional Student Council Conference next week at NIC, and our Sources of Strength elective class will be doing their first mentoring this week about the October theme, Positive Friends Month. Lake City hosted our very successful All Things Senior Night on September 24th, which was attended by over 300 people and featured 30 colleges and military representatives. Our college preparations also continue this month, as we will be offering the PSAT on October 16th. Our senior college prep classes have already done 1 campus visit to U of I and are doing their second this week to EWU, and will be hosting our second of 3 FAFSA workshop nights on October 22nd from 6 to 8 p.m. We will also have multiple events happening during College Application and Exploration Week, October 22nd through the 25th, including having college reps in our library helping families with applications and the FAFSA, and our college and career advisor, Ms. Delgizi, will be going into government classes to help seniors apply. The week will be dedicated to seniors pursuing post-secondary education or the workforce after graduating from Lake City. We are also proud to announce that Lake City student Alexis Cummins won the Mayor's Award for Student Excellence in the Arts for incredible wolf murals in the stairways of the new classroom edition. We've also received good news this year from the National Merit Scholarship Program. Andrew Rings and Aaron Olson were both awarded a letter of commendation for outstanding performance on the preliminary SAT National Merit Scholarship qualifying test in 2018. Karina Magnus and Alex Gary have both qualified as semifinalists in the 2020 National Merit Scholarship Program. Out of approximately 16,000 high school seniors who were semifinalists, Karina and Alex have the opportunity to continue in the competition for some 76,000 National Merit Scholarships to be offered next spring. We're so proud of our Timberwolf scholars. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. We'll see you again next month.
Okay, thank you, Emily. All right. Now we are up for public comment. And before we begin, I just want to remind the public, while this is a meeting of the Board of Trustees that takes place in public, it is not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting of the board to conduct district business. The board does allow some limited public comment on district-related items. Those wishing to address the board during public comment period are limited to 1 comment, not to exceed 3 minutes. If you have additional comments that you would like to present to the board, you may provide those in writing through our clerk of the board, Ms. Lynn Town. She will ensure that board members receive this additional commentary. Please keep in mind that board members will not respond to public comment. If I've determined that an individual statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, or repetitive, I may terminate that speaker's privilege to address the board. And, okay, Shauna Marshall. Good evening. If you'll just make sure the light's on for us at the mic there. And go ahead when you're ready.
Oh, I think it's on. Oh, I have to follow the students. They did so good. Oh. Mine is also not as lengthy as it looks. I just made it like a size 24 font so you can see it. Good evening, Board Trustees and Superintendent Cook, fellow educators, community members. My name is Shauna Marshall. This is my 14th year teaching at Sorensen. And I'm here today to share an update about something really powerful that's happening in our district. About 3 years ago, I was approached by 2 former students who wanted to offer more help to our struggling math learners. They had brainstormed and researched about starting a nonprofit, and they wanted to do a peer mentoring program where kids were helping other kids in math skills. So from their dream, Growing the STEM was born. I currently serve as the educational consultant on this board and got nominated to come here today. Our mission statement says, growing the STEM organizes and supports math and science programs for local students with an emphasis on developing youth leaders and encouraging underrepresented groups to pursue STEM education and activities. Our core values include youth development, equality, fun, hard work, and confidence. Through these core values, we've developed the Mathletes program, which is a 3rd grade through 5th grade mentoring program that serves primary students. Intermediate students have to fill out an application and apply to be a mentor, and if they're approved, they get to work with a younger student who is nominated by their teacher as needing some additional math support for a 6-week time frame. The mentors and the mentees work together, building math skills, relationships, and math confidence. This year, we were able to provide a stipend to all the teachers and to provide a math swag bag to them as well that includes new math manipulatives and games. Our second program is in support of all of our current Math is Cool teams. We are able to provide youth coaches to support the adult facilitators for those who love competitive math. This year, we're also able to stipend all the teachers who are facilitating the teams and sponsoring teams with t-shirts and travel expenses. Under the leadership of a 5th grader and an 8th grader, we started with 2 small programs in one little school. And this year, we are expecting our programs to serve 14 programs in 8 schools, impacting 425 district students with math support. We will have 7 Mathletes mentor programs, and we will have Math is Cool teams in 7 of our elementary schools. Plus, we have been sponsored 1 STEM pilot program that we're going to be implementing at Bora. We have worked hard on grant writing and are currently funded by the Idaho Community Foundation, Idaho STEM Action Center, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, Mountain West Bank, Idaho Central Credit Union have all partnered with us this year. So we'd like to publicly thank those supporters, but as well as the teachers and the paraprofessionals who have stepped up to serve these struggling and competitive math students. We'd like to thank Kate Orozco. She's been really supportive of helping us get our programs implemented in the schools, providing a lot of guidance and feedback to help us be successful in those schools. And we have a few next steps that are planned. We are currently actively recruiting 7 through 12th graders to coach more Math is Cool teams. And last year, we had 20 local youth serve as math team coaches. So that youth development is really important to us. If anyone's interested, they can contact us through our website, growingthestem.org. And then finally, Kennedy Krajak at Lake City High School and Lillian Smith at Coeur d'Alene partnered together, and they presented to dozens of interested teachers who came to a meeting with these 2 youth after school and are interested in starting up school STEM clubs at both of the high schools. So that's the next thing that the girls are working on. We look forward to bringing more good news in the near future about our goals of expanding. Our dream is just kind of make sure we have 1 program at every school in the district, improving math confidence in our students, improving their skills, and developing even more youth leaders within our district. So thank you for all you do to support District 271 students and teachers.
Okay, thank you, Shauna, for coming down and sharing. Getting a lot of good stuff in there, so thank you very much. And thank you for your support. Okay. We got a big consent agenda here today. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items A through O?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. Dr. Cook, I'll turn it over to you or to Ms. Ebner, whoever you choose, on the finance items.
So we're going to have a 2-part finance presentation today. Katie's going to present to you some preliminary data. I think that's at least going to be interesting and hopefully useful someday, but it's very early. But she and I talked about the possibility of getting something that would be in front of you guys for tracking and extrapolation of data for future calculations of support units. She's going to do that, and then I'm going to talk just a little bit about some things that happened in last year's legislative session that is starting to have a little bit of energy this year already. So, Katie?
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to go through an attendance and unit analysis. So for those of you who are not who aren't familiar with how we are funded by the state funds us via support unit. The majority of our funding is based on what they call a support unit. And if we can guess or get a good prediction of what our support unit is, we can predict about 75% of our state funding, so a huge piece of our funding. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is taking our enrollment data during the 3rd and 4th week of school, and there's a reason why I zero in on those 2 weeks, and taking a look at our our absence rate for those 2 weeks of school and coming up with a projection of what our support units are. So if you look at this table here, we've got prior year data, what our February support units were, what our enrollment was that 3rd and 4th week, weeks of school averaged, and then the average absence rate for those years. So if you look at that, you should be able to take that prior year data and kind of get a little bit closer to what we would see for our units for current year. Here is a graph of those same absence rates. So you see that they're pretty steady. They're pretty predictable. However, on the other hand, we have our enrollment numbers. So if you apply those absence rates, you should be able to get to average daily attendance, right, which is a foundational piece of our state calculation of support units. However, you have to remember that support units are based on grade level, groups of students, not just taking straight like how many students showed up and how many days were in session. It's broken down into student groups. So when we keep that in mind, whoops, wrong way. I came up with a number of methods when I was looking at this prior year data, and some were just not very good, and then some started to look, that's reasonable. And so this is one of the reasonable methods that came from this analysis. So step one, we're going to take our enrollment from that 3rd and 4th week, and then we're going to break it out to match the way that the state formula calculates support units. So we're going to group the students by the grade levels that the state breaks them out. We're going to call this adjusted enrollment. And then the second step, we're going to compare this adjusted enrollment to the actual attendance for prior years. So this is what students that showed up for the first 10 weeks of school, and that'll give us an absence rate, right? So we have enrollment, and then we have how many kids actually showed up. And that, if you look at it for a number 5 fiscal years, if you look at it for enough years, you should be able to see a trend. There are 2 really good reasons why this is a better way to look at it. The first one is we're looking at it by grades, the way that the state funds us. The second way is that this would capture an increase in a student or attrition. So if you're just looking at the rate of absence each week and you're not really taking into consideration the change in enrollment each week, you're not really getting a sense of what's going on. So with this way, we were able to see patterns. For example, 1st through 3rd graders. They have a lower rate of attendance compared to 4th through 6th graders. You might start to think, well, gosh, why would that be? I just assumed maybe their immune systems aren't so good. And then by 4th grade, they're like, okay, I can make it to school. But then you would expect kindergartners to have an even lower rate of attendance, right? Because they're even younger than a 1st through 3rd grader. However, we get more kindergartners as the fall goes on because maybe the parent or the family's new to the school system and, I got to get my kiddo to school. I guess school's in session. So if you take into consideration those sorts of changes in the data, this is a good method. So once we get to step 3, and we take the absence rates from step 2 and we create an average. And this is kind of where we pump the brakes. This is not a very good method because the absence rate, although it's you can track it a little bit, there are years where it's really high for one group or really low for another. And so if you're a statistician, that standard deviation, if that anybody remembers, senior year math, that is too high to really call that good data. So taking an average is not you're not really representing the volatility of, surprises within that data. But I'll get to that. I'll address that. Okay, so step 4, we're calculating our possible units by taking adjusted enrollment that I talked about, grouping everybody by where all the students by where the state groups them, and then dividing by the divisor to get what if every student showed up every day for the first 10 weeks and we didn't have any students leave us, we didn't have any new students, that's what we could possibly earn. That's not going to happen, right? So in step 5, we take that absence rate we were talking about earlier and we apply that to our adjusted attendance or our possible units. So this is, if you're less of a read it by word person, this one will make a lot more sense to you. So if you see the groups of students, you see the divisor, and then you see what I'm doing here with enrollment, we have to adjust it. I didn't talk too much about this, but the way that special education is funded by the state, I kind of backed into the calculation that they used there. So you've got to subtract students with special needs out of 1st through 3rd and all the different groups, and then you add them in as exceptional elementary or exceptional secondary. And then for preschool, that's a little bit tricky because those students are not with us full time. It's based on the student's need. For example, one preschooler may be with us 3 days a week for 2 hours. Another may only be with us 1 day for 2 hours. So the state converts them down to a full-time student. And so you get the adjusted enrollment. And then I'm going to skip over the actual ADA, but we go to possible units. So adjusted enrollment divided by the divisor gives us, if we had all students show up, we would earn 554 units compared to the 517 that we budgeted for, and I think that's a $4 million difference. So that would be quite the surprise, but it would not happen. So then we apply our absence rate, our average absence rate, and if you see that kindergarten absence rate is really, really, really low because we're getting more kindergartners. You look at 7 through 12, that's a bit higher than we normally see. We always talk about secondary being like 5.5%, 6%. That's capturing those students leaving us. So you get to an adjustment and then projected units on the average of 521. Okay, so let's not spend all that money right now, right? This is using that method. I assumed for FY 16, 17, 18, and 19, we knew nothing about what happened. I just took 3rd and 4th week enrollment and I applied this formula just to see how it worked. And if you can see it, the rate of variance is less than 1%. Yay, good job, right? No, look at the column to the right, $404,000 off. A surprise to the good. But on FY 17, 440,000. So that is not very confidence inspiring, right? If you look at, let's say we take those average absences, we don't do an average instead. We pick the worst year for every grade level and we apply it to this formula. It comes up with 515 units. So it's not really the worst case scenario. It could be worse. It could always be worse, right? We could have a really, really bad secondary attendance or, but I would say that, if we're that close choosing the lowest absence or the highest absence rate for all years on each grade level, and we're that close to our budgeted units, I'm feeling pretty good about what we budgeted at this point. Okay, so let's look at the best case scenario. That's saying every single year we're picking the best attendance rate. Every student is gonna show up and keep attending. That would be an impact to our budget, 10 more units. So that'd be, over $1 million. Okay, so I wanted to look at another method. And I'll go through this really quickly, but this method is to take our reports that we look at each week that just shows elementary enrollment, secondary enrollment, and what the absence rate. So it's not breaking out the data like we just did, but it's just kind of that gut check, like is that gut check reasonable to feel like we're on track? And what I essentially did was I converted that data to average daily attendance. So I took the enrollment times the absence rate, and that is what the average daily attendance number was. And I took that data for the same 4 prior years, and I compared it to what we actually earned in average daily attendance, and I came up with this ratio. And the ratio of units to total average daily attendance was pretty, there were years that we expected it to look higher or lower because of the fluctuation in the attendance. And that gave us a range. If you take the highest ratio, I think that the highest ratio is going to be the one that is the lower end of the range. So 517.98 units was the lower end, and then 524 units was the higher end, and we budgeted 517. So once again, another method is showing that we're kind of closer in the range. So how did we do on this one? About the same, right? We had about a 4-unit variance at the highest. So looking at the 2 methods, I prefer the method 1 because it's looking at the data much more granular and taking all of those, all the data points that matter in the state formula and kind of zeroing in and trying to find averages between them. However, method 2 just kind of gives us a sense of, do these reports that we look at each week, do they matter? And I think we can reasonably feel like they matter a bit. So any questions?
So Katie, when we're doing negotiations and you're writing and creating this budget, is that why oftentimes you hear the union talk about, you guys come up with different numbers and they might be using a different technique than we are necessarily, it's maybe not as conservative? Is that where we get sometimes, where they say, oh no, we're expecting X amount, and then you come back and say, well, actually, is this part of that conversation?
I think this type of information is really important. I think in recent years, we've spent a lot of time talking about the data in depth, and that makes all the difference when both teams can come to the table and understand why we're budgeting one number versus another. I think in the end, if you can explain your position, both sides can be reasonable about it.
Yeah,
So.
I think for me, being new at this, it was really valuable information, so thank you. And so maybe even a smaller version of this is something that we could start negotiations with, because I think it does give you a different lens to look at the data.
Yeah.
So we've kind of done that the last 2 years with the budget subcommittee that we started when Dr. Olson was here. And I think we do a revenue and expenditure and
a fund balance meeting.
a fund balance. So those are the 3 meetings we have with those folks, or we have jointly. And we're looking at more end of the year data at that point, right? We're looking at our February foundational payments and those sorts of things. So it's maybe a little more solid data than what
Yep.
this is.
I think this past year was the first year where we took a lot of time discussing units, the divisors, and even looking at enrollment projections that we've had prepared for us and breaking them into support units, that sort of thing. So I think it was beneficial for everybody, and I don't recall that there being any contention at all about what it was being budgeted. So.
No, that's been a big help, because previously we'd spend meetings upon meetings talking about units, sometimes negotiation sessions, and really that's been handled beforehand. So.
And I think this also gave a good, understanding of if you were to not be as close, like 515 versus 527 units, it's a big deal at the end of the year, and I think we're trying to be really conscientious. So I appreciate all the hard work.
Yeah, behind all those changes in attendance rates or the units being higher or lower, there's a story of, oh yeah, there was the windstorm that year, or oh, we had the flu really bad that year. So it's always nice to go and look back and make sure, what you expected to happen actually happened.
Katie, first, thank you for putting this together. It was Just very interesting to see and to see the variance in it. How do you see us using this data?
I think I would like to, now that the tables are made, plug in when we do receive our February payment, plug in that information, see how we did, and then in the future we can continue to look at it in the fall, make sure we're on track. I'm not fully seeing an application for this type of analysis to be implemented in budgeting. I think something similar can be used, but it can be hard to go from students that aren't here yet into, how much money are we going to earn? And so that's where we can run into issues. I think we probably will have to rely heavily on enrollment projections that actuaries are preparing and reporting, because there's a lot of just really it takes a professional to really get us good projections in that sense.
Yeah, it's still a lot of variance in there, right? From
Right.
the worst case to the best case, and
Yep.
you described it, I think, as a gut check, and I see it kind of useful for that, right? It's you're a month in, and okay, looks like we're in okay, but a lot could happen between now and June.
I think if the lower end we're showing maybe 10 units down, I think that's when we would start talking about, how are we gonna, and so I think it gives me quite a bit of confidence just to see it play out this way, that, we're on track, it looks good.
So do you anticipate we'll do this again next year? Maybe that's the question, this will be an annual thing that we'll, this
For
time
sure.
of year.
When I compare how the February data comes in, I may tweak the methods a little bit, just, because we'll have one more data point. But I think that this is valuable for me, and hopefully you all found it valuable.
Okay, thank you very much for putting that together. And that segues pretty nicely over to Dr. Cook. You may have worked on all that, and then they're going to change the formula, right?
Yeah, so there's an undercurrent of a conversation that started last legislative session last year that is going to continue and carry over. Now, whether or not they're going to change the formula still yet remains to be seen. But one of the things that came out of the legislative session was, if we wanted to change the formula right now legislatively, we couldn't, because we don't have a mechanism, we don't have rules established for how enrollment is going to be counted, and what does fractional enrollment look like, and what if a kid goes, and there's a lot of these, believe it or not, what if a kid is a participant or goes to two different school districts in some fashion or another? Maybe they're enrolled during the day, but they're taking a virtual class online from a different district, which, especially in rural areas, is not uncommon at all. And so one of the things that they presented, and can you guys pull up from the board book, just the definition of enrollment, section 331027. It's in it's the one that says finance presentation definition of enrollment. That's the one. So there's 6 rules right now. They're very common sense rules that are going to be guiding discussions, and that's these 6 rules. And there's already IDAPA rules are getting floated around, and we'll share those with you, that are going to start getting very granular on how we calculate fractional enrollment. But essentially, it's these 6 rules. Basically, full-time enrollment, which is what we're going to get funded on, arguably at some point, is based upon your participation or enrollment in a district or charter school. Second one is each kid counts as 1 FTE. Third one is that a kindergartner gets to count as 0.5. Fourth one is if a student is enrolled in some form of night school and or summer school, you can count that as an additional quarter, 0.25 FTE. And then a fifth one is, and this is the one that's already gotten much conversation and much change, which is, what do you do about a fractional enrollment? For example, something as simple as if a kid is a senior and they don't need all their credits, how do they get funded? Right now, funding isn't following enrollment, but potentially it could be changing. And that's one of the things that they wanted to make sure of, was they had the rules in place for how that's going to happen. So these rules are being developed right now and being socialized across the state right now. So in case they do want to change that direction and say, okay, we're going to be expected at the end of the year to be able to turn in our enrollment counts based upon these 6 rules, a little more granular than this, but this is kind of at the high level. And then last but not least, they're counting minutes that kids are in Rule 6. They're counting the minutes that kids are in class based upon the length of a course. And then right now, the language around what is considered a full-time student is when you have 4 courses worth of attendance. No, let me say it this way. When you have at least 4 hours worth of courses per day averaged a week. So what is that, 1,200 minutes, I think, is it mathematically. If you're under 1,200 minutes on a week, you would be considered a partial attendance. You wouldn't get funded, theoretically, of course, for a full FTE. If it's a block schedule like at Lake City High School, they're going to average that over 2 weeks. You're not going to get punished for being in that partial attendance. But that's the reason why this matters now, is because they're delineating how you define enrollment now, this year. And it's very possible that we define these terms for enrollment and the state still could say, we don't want to pull the trigger on going to an enrollment-based model for funding, but they want this in their back pocket in case that conversation ever takes place. So.
Yeah, just kind of interesting in that regard. I'm on the Policy Committee for Idaho Business for Education, and I'll probably have more information between now and our November board meeting, but we had a conference call last week, and there's something like 4 or 5 different variations of a rewrite floating out there, one of which actually is to do nothing, to maintain the status quo. And I think that's maybe coming from the governor's task force, that recommendation, but there's a number of them coming, some from the admin group. There's a few legislative groups that have different formulas, so it could be a lot of commotion around that again this legislative session.
How does dual enrollment count into this if the student travels off campus for their dual enrollment?
So currently the math is, there's the latest iteration of this is if it's a secondary student and it's between 1,200 minutes and 1,650 minutes total for the courses, then it's still just considered 1 FTE. So they're not going to change. Like, now remember, this is all just calculating enrollment. They're not going to say that if you're taking a full load at CHS and you're taking an extra course at North Idaho College that has some mathematical number of minutes tied to it, I'm going to forget the name of this thing. Advanced opportunities? Advanced opportunity funds are going to be paying for the courses that you're taking at North Idaho College. And so the FTE won't change based upon that. And remember, that's only if there ever gets to be an enrollment-based funding model. Right now, they're just putting the infrastructure into place with the rules so that in case they ever wanted to do something, that there was a way for us to define enrollment. I got it right, Mike?
So on a dual enrollment course, if it's a dual, let's say it's NIC and it's a Coeur d'Alene course, Coeur d'Alene School District course, then there's still funding associated with that. Or they're counted in that, their minutes are counted that they're at NIC.
Say that again.
So it's a dual enrollment course, let's say that's Coeur d'Alene School District and North Idaho College. Those minutes there at NIC are minutes.
They're giving us credit.
District.
They're giving us credit for those minutes. That's correct.
But if it were, let's say, a IDLA, and there probably isn't such a thing, but a Post Falls and NIC course that they were taking, those minutes would go to Post Falls.
Arguably, yeah.
So even when we have students that are fully enrolled in NIC, like they hardly even attend our campus, they still go the route since they're being funded through the advanced opportunities.
That's correct, right.
And hopefully they don't run out of the money that's allowed.
Yeah, so
to them.
far, I think the advanced opportunities monies are doing just fine. I haven't heard anything that has put them at concern right now for that. And so I think where this is going to get into a potentially tricky manner are things like summer school and night classes. So if we want to expand opportunities for kids or catch them up and do credit retrieval, and theoretically, a student from Post Falls could enroll and take some classes through Edmentum or something like that, and the next thing through us, and next thing you know, they would potentially qualify if, remember, they're not funding this way, if they ever went to a funding model in which you'd have to disaggregate some funding.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. Let's move on here to action items. And the first action item we have up is our boundary review committee assignments. Are you doing that one, Dr. Cook?
Yeah, I am. So let's, if you recall, we're under an agreement with Flow Analytics to get some feedback from them on our boundaries. And so one of the things that Flow has recommended is that they would like to put into service a committee that can help them do some conversations. I think that they have the intent of having 7 meetings with this committee group to gather input, to be kind of a launch pad. They'll use the committee to do some lifting of essentially the board's task to determine what kind of expectations you would want in any kind of an arrangement going forward on what our expectations would be for the new boundaries, including things like guiding principles and what the actual formal charge looks like coming from you guys. The Flow needs some local input, and one of the things they've asked us to do is to help them gather some folks to participate in a committee that would then do that lifting, if you will. Their recommendation after conversations with us was to recommend that we pull an administrator from each building that would be impacted. That would be impacted from the redistribution of the boundaries, that leaves 16 schools that would be potentially impacted. Venture doesn't have boundaries, so Venture wouldn't necessarily be impacted. So we would recommend that typically the building principal would serve in that capacity for each of the 16 schools. I suppose they could send an administrative representative if necessary, and then for them to gather one parent representative from each of those schools to attend along with them. So that's a total of 32 members. We would also recommend that 3 members to this committee come from Long Range Planning Committee, and then 2 from the Superintendent's Advisory Committee, 2 members from that group. I think there's about 35 or 40 representatives that will attend when we're full, when we have just about everybody there. And that leaves us with a total, I think, of 37 members on this committee. That committee will take the tasking of the board and go muck through the data and help with answering questions and working through that. And then Flow would bring that recommendation back to the board this would be a superintendent's committee, and Flow would take their input and present that information to you guys. I'd also recommend that all those committee meetings, we treat those, although it wouldn't be a board committee, I would suggest that we treat it as such in the lens of making sure that those meetings are open to the public and the records that we keep are available, and keep minutes and just make those available to the public as necessary. And so what we'd like to ask for tonight from you guys is the approval of committee formation so we could get started on this. Time is becoming of the essence, and we're getting ready. It's less than a month away that we should have the results of the survey that was undertaken, the data that we've provided to Flow to start to run some of the numbers for us and the demographic research. All that data is coming back within the month, and we'd like to go out and get this committee established with your permission. So.
Okay, So I'm going to summarize that, make sure I'm on the same page, sure that we're on the same page. So it's not going to be a board committee. It's going to be administrative committee, and typically we wouldn't, we don't have to take action on that. I think in consulting with Dr. Cook, Trustee May, and I during agenda planning, part of the challenge with doing a board committee is there's rules as far as committee selection and application window and all those sorts of things that we just don't have time for. And so by framing this as an administrative committee, it's a little quicker to pull that group together and to get started with the work that's tasked. The big difference between the two is just admin. There's no minutes, or minutes don't have to be kept. It's not subject to open meeting laws. And I think Trustee May and I felt that that was important for this committee because we're talking a big change here. So really what Dr. Cook's asking us to do is approve this administrative committee with the tweak there that they're subject to open meeting laws. We're going to follow the open meeting laws with this committee.
And I think additionally, the only other difference is they report to the superintendent and not to the board.
That's correct.
Right. So they'll make a recommendation to the superintendent, who will then present that recommendation to us.
I thought it all looked really good. I had a quick question about one paragraph in it. The magnet schools with overlays will need to have a voice in this process and will be included. I anticipate, I wasn't sure, I wanted to clarify, for any parent that attends a magnet school that we're not discussing the actual magnet policy. This is only pertaining to overlays and boundaries.
That's correct. So one of the things that will be coming, that the board will be assigning for us to work through guiding, I think guiding principles might be the best way to talk about it, are what are the values that we want to ensure moves on or are modified or stopped with the new boundaries as they are fleshed out over time over the next several months, weeks and months. And one of those potentially could be things like, what do we want to see from our magnet schools? Do magnet schools have their own zones? Do they have an overlay? Do they have no zones? There's all kinds of possibilities when you think about how they are best served for the community. And so there will be a point at which the board will present to this committee a set of guidelines and principles of where it is that kind of, if you will, the edges of the box of which to bring recommendations back to you regarding, and those guiding principles, that kind of tasking charge that you're sending this committee off to solve. What you want from that group could include things like, what is the purpose of the either overlays or the lack of overlays, or whether we're going to have transportation, those kinds of things for magnet schools. So not necessarily an indictment or support of magnet schools, just how are they going to fit in the new scheme?
I think that's all great. I think that what worries me about that is that even, discussing what do we want to see from magnet schools, busing, those are big issues that if we don't allow magnet schools to have a voice in the process, because clearly we know that they do have a voice. So, whether it's one person on this committee or if we're really going to take up magnet schools as a guiding principle, that we allow them opportunity to weigh in. And maybe it's a separate, we reach out to them and say, we're going to be addressing these things. Is there anything you'd want us to know about magnet schools, or their values to you that you want us to make sure we retain or consider while we're making these considerations?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the most obvious ones, because we currently have the two magnet schools that are in the system. But quite frankly, that's why you want a representative, a building administrator representative and a parent representative from every school, because every school has different nuanced ways in which they can be impacted by the decisions we make when it comes to the boundaries and how we move forward from this. So I think that's really important to declare. And typically the values aren't very specific things. They're pretty generalized, like these are the goals we want you to keep in mind as you work. I'm not sure magnet schools are any different than any other school. It's just an easy one for us to talk about because of the way that they fit within our current boundaries right now. And this could be, any one of these issues could be potentially a charged one to discuss.
I just want to make sure that it's not one issue, like magnet schools would derail the process for the collective. And so I think being proactive, if it's going to be something that we consider in our guiding principles, that we allow them the opportunity to, at least through statement, through coming to a board meeting, weighing in on
Yeah.
So that discussion, I don't know that we've picked an exact date for that, but it's on that Flow spreadsheet that we meet as a board. With Flow, will be presented the data from the surveying that they're doing now, and some of those subjects are touched on that, right? And, you know, other things we're going to have to decide and kind of process from that data is, you know, thinking of the survey, but you know, is neighborhood schools more important, or is it equity? And you know, there's a number of things, walkability, safety,
Geographic
routes,
barriers,
right?
like
There's
highways.
a number of things that to develop these attendance zones, we're going to have to say, okay, this is a priority over that. We're going to have to stack some stuff a little bit. And so what I envision is we'll do that in November, and we'll probably get some feedback based on what we decide, and we may tweak that, and that's, you know, it's a several month process, and so that will guide the work that they do in their spring board proposals, maybe those first couple of meetings, and we may say, whoa, we missed the mark here. We misinterpreted what the community said here, and this is more important than that. You know, so we may tweak those position statements.
Yeah, there's just so many factors that can influence how these boundaries get proposed. And so part of the conversation, that's why they do a springboard. That's why Flow presents this, all right, here's the first draft. And the first thing, they actually told us, the first thing that we want to have happen is that the first draft gets changed, because that's our guess, right? And we want that to become collectively and locally owned. And so it's not their guess at what is best, but that the discussions become very material as to what is valued in the community.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the committee as presented, as requested, the method as requested?
This formation of the committee?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, motion carries. Ms. Town. All right, next up we have policies for action, and we saw these last month for information. And Ms. Town has a note here. It looks like there are 2 of these, is that correct, Ms. Town, that are being pulled for some more work?
Correct.
And that is 5100 P2 and 8200. So those are going to come back to us at a later date. They need a little more work. So I think since we're doing that, I think for approval, we'll get these one at a time. I think it'll be more or less confusing for me. So, and these were out for comment for the last 30 days. I believe no comments were received on any of those. But is there a motion to approve board policy 4105, 4105P, and 4105F as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that policy or those policies? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. And then, let's see, is there a motion to approve policy 5105P2 as presented?
So moved. Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion on those? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town.
We need 5100.
Is 51 still in here?
Yeah. Well, they have to. 5100 and 51.
Oh, it's just P2, okay. All right. So 5100 is still up for approval tonight. So is there a motion to approve 5100?
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And then last up here, is there a motion to approve 5390 as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. Okay, we are into information items here. And first up, we have our district work plan update. Dr. Cook.
So I will tell you, we've now completed 3 Portrait of a Complete Graduate follow-up sessions, 3 community meetings. We did one in the morning, one at lunchtime, and one in the evening. I think we have, we're going to do another one with our Spark committee on Thursday of this week. And then we've also got one scheduled for November 4th, Trina, is that right? 4th or 5th, with the Chamber of Commerce group. And so we also will be bringing that back to you guys with all of the, I guess, the internalized feedback, externalized feedback, and I would anticipate that we'll have something to share with you at the November board meeting that will look, I think it's going to look substantially different, believe it or not, with just the feedback that we've gotten as far as the visual of it. Definitely a language change, but it's been a great process that we've gone through, and to get the feedback and to have people say, oh, what I meant when I saw this and said this was the following. And so I think we'll just keep you updated as that happens and as we continue to do those meetings. And I anticipate that even the design will look somewhat different as well. So excited to bring that back. I'll just mention that we sent 4 of our district administrators to the national conference on Portrait of a Graduate work this past week. That was in Houston. I think it was about 100 degrees down there. And Kate K, Kate O, Trina, and Frank went down for that and said that it was unbelievable what districts that have taken this on already have been doing, some of them that have been working on this 3, 4, 5 years, how transformational it's been for their communities, because it brings attention to so much more than just content knowledge that we would expect our kids. And it changes even not just grades 9 through 12, but what you would expect a 5-year-old to do on their pathway to this. And so one of the exciting, we're hearing language like, once it's adopted by the district, then it becomes how do your journey on that, from changing to from a I guess you'd call it a traditional path to this Portrait of a Graduate. And you've got to operationalize that, and you've got to make it available to the kids through the way that they're instructed, and the way they're assessed, and the way that that learning is presented to them in the classroom. So Trina is going to give you some feedback on school start times and high school schedules. So.
Good evening, Superintendent Cook, Chair Morrisroe, and trustees. Just a couple other items on our district work plan. The School Start Times Committee has been formed, and our first meeting will be at the end of the month, October 30th. We plan on meeting once a month from 4 to 6:30 here at Midtown Center. Again, it will follow open meeting laws. And Seth Denniston, our Director of Technology, has volunteered to help us. We anticipate quite a bit of work with this, as well as the work plan, so he's going to help us facilitate those meetings. That way we can get started on some of the other work plan items. Our meetings are October 30th, November 20th, January 15th, February 19th, March 18th, and April 22nd, and we anticipate a report to the board at the May 2020 meeting. So hopefully we'll have some recommendations for you then. Also, with high school schedules, on September 25th, I met with the high school principals, and we have a follow-up meeting tomorrow. What we are doing is we are taking that Portrait of a Graduate and kind of working backwards. We will be looking at our graduation requirements, as well as what bell schedule really makes sense in delivering those requirements. Tomorrow, our meeting is really a fact-finding meeting, getting to know the current schedules that we have and what are some of the benefits of those schedules, but what are also some of the barriers and what inequities do we create with those schedules. So we're kind of taking a deep dive tomorrow, and then we should have more information to present to you next month.
Dr. Call, do you know when you guys will expect a recommendation for the high school schedules?
I think we're still trying to shoot for that March timeline.
Okay, good.
I know a lot of it will depend on what comes out of flow and as we're looking at our attendance zones. But it'll be important that we do something early in the spring if we're going to look at changes in the fall, because that will impact Skyward and how we register for courses and things like that.
I know you guys are exceedingly busy in your work plan. Seems like there's always something to do, but for me, high school schedules are, if I was to prioritize one, I would prioritize that. I think the inequity, the more I come back to the curriculum audit, they talk about it over and over again, and I feel like pushing it back even one more year would be difficult for me to just accept for the community and for students at both schools and graduation requirements. So I feel like if there's a will, there's a way. If we could get this one done this year, for me, it would be a step in the right direction.
Well, and I know we're looking at anticipating approval of our portrait of a graduate in February, and so I can see that following right afterwards. If we have any sticking points, a lot of that will be the graduation requirements, but I can see both of those coming to you about the same time. Any questions?
Dr. Cottle, on the school start time committee.
Yes.
I see here, and you said it, that you anticipate if there's recommendations of tweaks or changes that would come to the board in May. And would that be with a timeline? I mean, I know that recommendations could be to do nothing. It could be minor tweaks. It could be a major change, potentially. And it seems to me a major change might be a bit of a shock to the system if that were going to start the following school year. But is that something the committee will look at as far as
Yes, we will look at the timeline. I think part of it is we want to make sure we do our due diligence and making sure that we're not getting ahead of other things that are happening in the district. If it's something where it ends up being we're just shifting, taking our current schedules and shifting, then it may not be a very big impact. But I think if we're looking at something that's a real big wholesale change, probably the sooner we bring things forward to the board, the better. But then again, if it's something that's really going to end up being controversial, it may end up taking longer. So I think a lot of that we won't know until we get into our first couple meetings. But we'll keep you posted if we think the timeline's going to shift either way.
Okay, thank you very much for the updates on that stuff. And that's going to continue to be basically a standing agenda item. We'll get updates on those couple of items. We may start shifting the work plan stuff into its own agenda item, and then the enrollment and start times would stay together. Okay, moving on here. Item E, some enrollment projections around high schools, I think.
Yeah, so if you recall, 2 months ago we did kind of a walkthrough on enrollment projections for elementary schools and just kind of wanted to show you what we were boxed in against with regards to space in our elementary schools. Last month, we did a similar kind of walk through the middle schools. And so now what we're going to do is take you through kind of a fascinating enrollment tracking procedure that we've just implemented in the last couple of months for high schools, and just being able to get dialed in on knowing and understanding what happens once our kids get into our high schools. So we've got some data to share with you, and Dr. Cottle is going to walk you through that.
So this presentation will be a little bit different than what we presented in the past with elementary and middle school. We're in a different place with high schools, thankfully, because we did pass a bond, and we did add on to both of our large high schools. So it'll be a little bit different picture. But what I'm starting out with today is this is basically our enrollment as of the 3rd of October. And I put October last year, and you can see that we're only up about 30 students. But the interesting part about high school is our enrollment changes constantly. We have constantly students coming in to our system and leaving our system. Sometimes they're changing schools. And so the slides today and what's in your packet kind of takes a little bit different view. Things that impact our high school enrollment is we are in an open enrollment state. And so that means by statute, districts have to provide opportunities for parents to have some sort of choice. So we do, as you know, we have students that come in from different districts. In the past few years, because we've been very full, we have limited that. For example, at Lake City High School, we tend to have quite a few students from Post Falls area because they live closer to Lake City, prefer to go to that school. In the last few years, because of enrollment, we've really limited that to siblings. So enrollment both in and out of district has impacted us. We do have quite a bit of choice at the high school level. Students can opt to leave our system and attend charter schools or private schools in the area. Some of those are brick and mortar schools, as in charter, or Kootenai Bridge Academy, and some of them are online schools that they can attend. We do have students that unfortunately drop out, which is a concern. And then for Venture High School, if you notice the enrollment is pretty high this year. We attract students at Venture not only from our system, but we do have other school districts in our area that will send students to Venture. Venture is the only alternative high school that has CTE programs, and so I think that's kind of a draw. So there was a board member that asked a question: what happens to our students as they travel through our system? And we decided to actually put some slides on here because it's really interesting information. So this seems like a really complicated slide, but the best way for me to explain for you to look at it is if you look at the right-hand column on all high schools and you start at the bottom. So the bottom row is 2015-2016 school year. So a student that was in the class in 2019 that graduated last spring started as a ninth grader in our system in 2015. And so if you look at that bottom number, 864, that's how many ninth grade students we had in the Coeur d'Alene School District on the first day of school. And then you move to the right, and you will see at the last day of school of their ninth grade year, we went all the way down to 838. So we lost some students throughout the course of the year. Then if you follow that same class, so you follow the arrow moving up to the 842, as a sophomore, we started that first day of school with 842 of that same cohort. So we'd gained some students over the summer. And then the last day of school, their sophomore year, that class, we lost some more students, and they're now at 795. And then you can see over the summer, their junior year, we gained a few more. So we're at 799. We lost over the course of the year at 761. And then their senior year, they started a little smaller, 759, and then down to 692. So the story of that class of 2019 is we started out as freshmen in the fall of 864 students, and we went all the way down to 692. And during that course of time, of course, we have students coming into our system, we have students leaving our system, and unfortunately, as a system, we did not have a very good process of figuring out where students were going. Within Skyward, we just categorized them of coming in or leaving, and we didn't really track very well of where they were going. For example, we know that charter really impacts our system. We have many students that leave from 5th to 6th grade, and then sometimes they come back during junior high or middle school, and sometimes they come back during high school. And because we have not tracked this, we don't have that detailed information, which is problematic when it comes to making decisions. And then the blue below kind of shows you the loss. For each school, we didn't calculate the loss. When you kind of peek at that, you'll notice that the trends are a little different between the comprehensive high schools compared to Venture. Venture started out with only 3 ninth graders, and that's really by design. As an alternative high school, there's certain criteria students have to qualify as an at-risk student. So many students are not ninth graders. Usually they will enter our system as sophomores, maybe juniors or seniors. So it's kind of interesting. There's a different trend for the alternative school. Here's the same picture, but this is the class of 2018. And you can see very similar trends. Lake City High School, for example, started out with 424 in that cohort and ended up with 327. Coeur d'Alene High School started with 409, ended up with 330. And then Venture started with 20 and then ended up with 35. There's some other school years in your packet. I chose to not put those slides up here, but to go to an alternate view, and some of that is because we were missing some freshman data in one of those cohorts. Here's another way to look at it. This may seem a little confusing. This is overall class size when you look at the district for the class of 2020, 2019, 2018, and 2017. The class of 2020 has not yet graduated. That's this year's seniors. So we started out with 833 students with that cohort, and we're now down to 745. And then you can look at the totals in bold for 2019, 18, and 17. And some years the drop is more than others. And so again, this is where as a system we really need to know where are the students going. Are they going to charter? Are they going to Post Falls? Are they going to an online academy? Those are things that we need to track better. And please interrupt me if you have any questions.
Well, I'm gonna ask a couple questions for you.
Yes.
And thank you, and thanks to Christine for pulling this together. Because it's interesting data, and I think just for me, so I was the one who asked Christine, I'm like, is this something you could do? Could you pull this together? Just based on those attendance sheets we get, because I think we knew what happens there. And I think as someone who dropped out for a half a year or a year of high school, it was just something I was curious about, right? Is what happens to these kids, and we know we lose kids. Every high school does, right? As you look across the state, and so we know they're not all dropouts, right? Because if they were, our graduation rate, that's reported by the state, would be 70% or something like that, and it's in the 90%. But I think what I've heard is we really don't know where they went because we weren't tracking that.
Correct. We just track if they're going in and out of state or if they're moving around in and out of the district. But
so
we had a comment column, and so the building registrars, we really didn't have a process in place, and so some of them were putting comments on where they were going, and some of them weren't, and it wasn't very consistent. And it's really a K-12 issue, and so now we have worked out a process where all our buildings are going to track when a student leaves or comes into our system. There'll be a drop-down menu, and then they will pick, and so we will be able to have some choices. So, for example, in 2018, our graduation rate was 87.5%, and that's the federal cohort rate, which means we have to count students that leave our system starting from 9th grade, and it's really an on-time graduation. So if they stay with us until they're 21, they're considered, as not graduating. So in the class of 2018, it was 87.5%, but if you look at our loss or attrition, it's really closer. We lost quite a bit more than that.
I guess that's why I'm confused how we don't know where they're going. If we're reporting, or we're able to report an 87% graduation rate, but we know that we have 20% that we're losing roughly, how are we coming to that number if we can't account for them?
In the IC coding, it does track. So when the state pulls up our IC data, they can actually see which districts picked up our students. So for example, in that year, we really lost in 2018, our graduation rate was 87.5%. So that means 12.5% of our students didn't graduate on time. But we have a larger percent, and I didn't calculate it, that left our system. So the state has some access to data that we don't, and so a lot of it is we need to do a better job of coding when students are coming into our system and leaving. So then we know exactly how many are going to charter, when they're coming back, if we're getting quite a bit of students from a certain district. So a lot of it's in our IC reporting. And so those are things that they're working on, and we started instituting this year. So at the end of the school year, we should have some data on where kids are going.
It's a relief then that we know they're going someplace, at least if the state's able to track that.
And some of them aren't, unfortunately. For example, that year, 87%, that's not a really great graduation rate. In 2017, our graduation rate was 86.5. And we don't, right now with the class of 2019, we don't have that rate right now. There's an appeal window where the state sends us our preliminary numbers, and then we go back through and check our data and make sure.
And I think on that graduation rate, if a student leaves our system, let's say, and they enroll in another system, then they don't count against us or for us.
Correct.
But if they leave our system and they don't enroll somewhere and we can't prove where they enrolled, right, then they do count towards us. Is that right?
Correct. So if they enroll somewhere else and for some reason they don't request records, or if they go and they get a GED, those students don't count as graduates for us. And we've actually had that problem with a charter school where they were not enrolling our students until they actually met that school's graduation requirements. And so we've been kind of working on that, because there are some, unfortunately, some schools that play the game.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like we run into that problem with Bridge, right? Somehow they're not tracked, or maybe I'm not supposed to say that?
I didn't want to say the name.
Oh. I just know that it's been a discussion, and so it does affect our numbers, so it makes our numbers look, sorry.
So I just want to add, this became really important to us, just as a data point that we wanted to make sure ultimately what you want is you want zero dropouts, right? Ultimately. But if someone chooses to drop out, you'd want to know, all right, of our freshman cohort, at the end of their 4 years, we want to be able to account for 100% of them. Or they either graduated or they transferred to another in-state school or they transferred out of state, and this percentage of them got their GED, whatever that might look like. And so one of the things that we talked about pretty early on was we've got to have a mechanism for collecting that data so that we know how to essentially diagnose what those issues are and then attend to each of those. Because if the idea is, go back to class of 2018, I think was 87.5%, that there's 12.5% of those that we want to make sure we are attending to, or at least know what's going on with that 12.5%, whether it's whether their academic needs weren't being met, whether they just moved and everything was fine, but they moved out of state and so there's no way to track them. Being able to know what those decisions are is going to impact how we deliver services in our high schools.
This is a number that I think would be valuable for futures. As we're improving what you guys are reporting to us every month, is this something that we could kind of keep a closer eye on now that we have a way to track them and kind of quantify it? Quarterly maybe, or?
I don't know if we'd have enough information to do every month, but I think, as we get the data coming in, possibly through the board memo, and maybe add some of those to our graphs.
Yeah, because it was kind of disappointing when you get the end of the year graduation rate, or we report to the state, and so much time has passed, and then that way we'll know in the future what can we implement to help these students, give them resources, and improve what we're doing.
Yeah, we're tracking enrollment data pretty regularly, monthly, because it does fluctuate. It fluctuates daily in some regards, but monthly we are updating information that we can report to you guys that would at least give a better trend of all elementary, middle, and high school.
And I would add some of the timeliness with tracking is the students will say, I'm leaving your system, I'm going to enroll, for example, in Post Falls, but we don't count them as being enrolled in Post Falls until we get their records request from that school. And so sometimes there's a lag between our numbers and us knowing the reason. So this is the same data, but on a graph. And in your board packet, you can see which year is freshman, but it's just, I like it because it just gives you a visual. It's hard to see for the audience. I also included a slide. I broke out one for each high school. For example, here's Coeur d'Alene High School, and you can see how they've lost students over time as well. And I'd point out, for example, in 2018, they went from a cohort starting out at 409 students to 330, and that seems like a lot, but that year their graduation rate was 90.2%. So it shows that we really do need to have a process and have more information if we're going to use this data to make decisions.
Yeah, I think there's probably lots of reasons this is important data to look at. So I'm glad we're looking at it. A couple of them that spring to mind just quickly to me is just one, we should know, why is it changing? I mean, and that wasn't a question we were asking, but now we are. And that'll be important to track, right? Because it could be something we're not doing to meet their needs, or maybe it's a course offerings, or there could be all sorts of reasons. I think the other one it's very important is if we look at planning data around facilities, and you start building spreadsheets like Ms. Ebner did today on attendance, and it'd be real easy right now to look. We have that 5th and 6th grades it's kind of a bubble in our district, right? And you could say, oh, geez, that's going to float through, and we're going to have whatever it is, 940 kids. It's somewhere around that in those. It's like 40 or 50 bigger than all the ones around it. And if think how crowded our schools would be if those numbers didn't change, right? But ideally, that's what you'd want, right? You want to meet the needs of your kids, and you want them to stay with you, and you want to see them from K to 12, where you can. And so it's just important.
It's
Planning data, and I hope over time we can, we shrink that.
Well, and I think one of the things that for us to keep in mind is right now we don't have the mechanism to even know what a fifth year or a fifth semester, like an extra semester of high school for those kids that just missed it. They don't get a count in that 90% for that class. And so some of the kids are making those adjustments that they needed just to get that extra few credits to get through. And that's ultimately what we're striving for. It's, of course, we'd love to be able to put them all through in their 4 years. But right now, tracking every aspect of that data is going to have to change.
And I would add some of it, with our planning, it's not only staffing, but we've been trying to provide balance between the two high schools. And so when it comes to open enrollment and approving, some of those decisions we've made in the spring, trying to anticipate how many kids are going to show up in the fall. And by not having all that accurate information, sometimes we may not be making the best decision, or we may be shifting quite a few students, like what happened with Coeur d'Alene High School this year, and then all of a sudden they get an influx of students that move in, and then we're in trouble. We have a capacity issue. So there's the trends there for Coeur d'Alene High School, which is very similar to the district. Just a visual representation of those numbers. Here's Lake City's numbers. And again, comprehensive high school, so you can see a lot of the trends the same. Let's see if I have their graduation rate on here. So same thing, just using that same year, 2018, they went from 424 to 327, and the graduation rate was 89.1% that year. And there's their trend. And then Venture High School, again, kind of has the opposite trend, but that's the purpose of that school, is to meet the needs, or if sometimes students really actually choose to go there because it's a different model. And so I'd like to share, with an alternative school, they are held to the same standards and requirements as the comprehensive high school. And so when it comes to their graduation rate, students then enter as ninth graders, and if they have to complete on time by their senior year to be counted as a graduate. And so a venture sometimes is a disadvantage because it may take a student a couple extra years to catch up. But in 2018, actually, I'll give you 2017. Their graduation rate was 50.8%, and in 2018, they raised it to 61.8%. And so we're curious to see what this next year holds, because as you know, they've been implementing quite a few wonderful programs, to help their students feel safe and to accomplish their goals. So we're really excited to see the 2019 numbers. And so their trend is kind of the opposite. They tend to go up, except for here and there where there's a dip. So again, just to reiterate some things, we are tracking things better. We are working on a district-wide process, so that way we can better track students that are coming and going into our system, so that way we have accurate information when we go to make some decisions, whether it's staffing decisions or open enrollment decisions. So if there's any questions, I'll take any more questions.
Questions? Okay.
Okay, and we'll bring some data back when we get some good numbers, and maybe we can figure out where they're coming and going to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. All right. Next up is update on math. We got our curriculum audit back. Katie, welcome. You're going to give us some information on that and how we're using that report and what we're doing.
Thank you, Chair Morris-Rowe, Superintendent Cook, and honored Board of Trustees. So I apologize for not get this information. Oh, there we go. I apologize that we didn't get this information to you sooner. We received our integrated math curriculum audit in September, and so that's why I know we were hoping to have it sooner. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the audit said. Much like the first curriculum audit, the larger curriculum audit, this is an exception report. So it's looking, it's measuring what we have against standards and telling us where we fall short. So it doesn't give us any real kudos or attaboys. It's telling us where we have discrepancies from overall standards. Differently from the previous audit, this was an off-site review. So they didn't go into any classrooms, they didn't examine student work. Instead, they looked at pacing guides, they looked at district adopted instructional resources, our end of course assessments, etc. So this was a little bit different from the larger audit in that regard. I think it's important to note some of what the auditors told us about this math audit, which is that auditors are careful to note that their findings have no bearing on the philosophy of whether or not to utilize an integrated mathematics program over a traditional mathematics program. They said, if the district is committed to the philosophy of an integrated mathematics program, they should not abandon it due to the findings. They should instead invest the resources to properly develop a curriculum and assessment system within the integrated program. If the district were to choose to return to a traditional program, they would still need to do the same type of development to provide a quality traditional program. And that comes from pages 11 and 12 of the audit. And I think what is really wonderful about this audit is that it's a gift in that it gives us a roadmap for how to proceed and how to improve our curriculum that we currently have for integrated math 1, 2, and 3. So what did our finding tell us? They gave us 4 basic findings. The first said that our curriculum guides were inadequate and lacking quality components. Things that were also present in the larger curriculum audit, things such as prerequisites, having instructional techniques associated with it, having assessment questions embedded in the curriculum guides, etc. The second finding was that learning targets are not adequately aligned with Idaho's standards. Learning targets are teacher-friendly written targets that are written to help us interpret the standards. So what that's telling us is that the way that we wrote our learning targets don't adequately reflect the standards in content, context, and cognition in many areas. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The third is that our end of course assessments were not adequately aligned to the Idaho standards. They found that they were more aligned to the SAT than our own Idaho standards, and so that's something that we can work on. And then the fourth was that our instructional resources and strategies were not adequately aligned to the learning targets. So it gives us 4 areas to look at. I want to briefly talk about number 2 because it's a little confusing. When we look at our standards by course, we find that in Integrated Math 1, we have 50 Idaho standards for mathematical content, which is roughly 38%. And then in Integrated Math 2, we have 82 standards that we look at, which is roughly 62%. And in Integrated Math 3, 61 standards, which is roughly 47%. And when you look at those, you might go, oh goodness, that's shocking or dismaying at first. But what that's telling us actually is that that percentage is over what you would expect to see over the whole course of a high school career. So what makes the high school standards more complex is that they are not limited to a grade band other than 912. And so what you see there is over the course of an entire high school career. And it's left up to the school districts to decide how you're going to organize those standards and in which progression they're taught. And so that makes this work much more complex for creating high school curriculum. So when you look at 38% for integrated math 1, that's actually a really reasonable number, and that audit tells us that too. On page 27, they wrote, based on the number of standards and learning targets listed for each course, auditors found that staff have feasible amount of time available to teach the learning targets in integrated math 1, 2, and 3. So what that's telling us is that we do have a reasonable number of standards in each course that kids are going to be able to learn and master those standards in those courses, and that's kind of tricky to do. So that's a cause maybe for celebration here. So it resulted in 3 recommendations. The first is to create high quality curriculum with all the necessary components and properly align learning targets to the standards. So in that, we'll be looking at those missing components that were described and making sure that we do our very best to get all of those in there. The second is to make sure that we design our end of course assessments to align with the content, context, and cognitive depth students need to master the curriculum. So that's making sure that when we write those learning targets and we interpret them, that we then create assessments that align to those learning targets more deeply. And then the third is to look at our on and off ramps for the integrated math program. So looking at how do we place kids in integrated math 1, 2, and 3? How do we provide opportunities for them to get enrichment if they need it, to find remediation if they need it, and all of those components. So I just gave you a lot of information. Maybe I'll take a second here and ask if there were any questions over this first part.
Okay, just to clarify too, so it's clear the standards that we're referring to are really the standards for our courses, excluding our advanced math courses. So the standards that Idaho wants us to cover don't include, let's say, calculus or pre-calculus. Those are above kind of the base standards that were mandated to make sure we fill in math 1, 2, and 3. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
And I know the plus standards that we're working to reintegrate into math 1, 2, and 3. Do you anticipate that those will be spread out kind of equally amongst, integrated math 1, 2, and 3, or does it just depend on the standard and where it falls, I guess?
That's a great question, and I think it's more the second part of what you said. It depends on the standard and where it falls. As you can see, we even though we have an appropriate number of standards, there's still a wide variation in the number of standards for each course. So I would anticipate the plus standards being similar to that.
On a couple of slides before, and you don't have to go back, but you had the chart about percentages, and I think I was one of those that read that went, whoa, we're only, I was thinking 38% out of 100, right? That was how I was looking at it. And then after 2 weeks of heartburn over that, I learned I was interpreting it wrong. I missed another page. And so I think in those 3 courses, whether you're in a traditional or an integrated approach, there's something like 130 standards. Is that right?
Correct.
That need to be covered over the course of those 3 years.
Correct.
And so in the one, if we're doing 50 or whatever it was, I think around 50 out of the 130, that's how it got to the 38%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in the same breath, I guess, if you added up those standards, it's more than 130. And it's because we're covering some of them multiple times or in multiple years. Am I reading that right?
You are 100% correct.
And so we weren't missing big chunks of standards, not 62% like I thought at first. But there are a few that we missed on it.
There were 7 standards. According to the chart on page 23 of the audit, it tells us that we had 7 that were missing of the 130.
Okay.
When you were just describing that, the 38% and how many standards they need, I pictured Dr. Cook's slides of the standards that kids are supposed to have as they start in our system all the way up, and the little kid at the end. I don't know why that popped in my brain when you said that, but it is important to think of that, because I thought the same thing. And then when you look at it, it's like, okay, by the time they're through Math 3, or this is what, so it definitely, when you explained that, it was so helpful, very, very much so. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
They mentioned a lot the term context. Could you just kind of, I think that's a hard one for me to visualize when they're referring to context. What are they referring to exactly? I know content, I get that piece, but the context part is a little more
Yeah, that was something I had difficulty with too until I went to the CMSI training in Houston this summer. So thank you for sending me to that. What I learned is that context is talking about how we expect kids to be able to express what they have learned. So for example, does a student get to use a calculator? Does a student have to explain it in writing, like a narrative form? Can a student just simply express this as a function or as an algorithm? So it's talking about how do we expect students to be able to show what they've learned.
So that being said, do the state standards then clarify if they want context for certain standards? Is that maybe where they found deficiencies?
Well, so what they did to find that information was they looked to the ISAT. And they looked at how our students are being assessed. And so there's some blueprints that help us understand how kids will be assessed on these different standards. And they call that deep alignment, when they look at how kids are assessed compared to how we assess our kids.
Okay. Any other questions on what Katie's talked about so far?
Okay. So our path forward, there are 3 things that we're doing in parallel as we're moving forward, much like a 3-lane road. So we are first seeking out existing models of solid integrated math curriculum that in districts where kids are finding a high degree of success. So we're working on seeking those out. And those are just to serve as touchstones to see if, how have they organized their materials and their ideas. The second is we're creating a secondary math academy. I'm excited to report that we had our first 2 meetings on Thursday and Friday last week. We have an incredible group of educators who are dedicated to this process. They reported feeling a little overwhelmed but hopeful at the end of our 2 days together. So that's exciting. And then the third is we're working on developing our curriculum management plan. So part 2 of this is sort of a beta test for part 3 of this, developing our curriculum management plan. So we're field testing, if you will, the how we're thinking about curriculum development in the future. And this is how we're thinking about curriculum development in the future. So if you look at the first year of our cycle, we will look at writing the curriculum, and that will involve heavy, intensive, job-embedded professional development for our teachers to think about how to write curriculum. And we'll use the information that we've been provided from our audit to help us with that. Then we would bring back before the board our first best draft of our course pacing guides and ask for 1-year provisional approval. And then in year 2 of this process, we would start implementing the curriculum. We would look at possible resource adoptions. Teachers who were involved in year 1 would also be involved in year 2. We're asking for a 2-year commitment from them. And they would have learning labs to share out their learning with each other. And then we would also look at adding those remediation and on-ramp classes that were described in the curriculum audit. That was finding 3, I believe. And we won't really look at getting to those until year 2, just because the first 2 recommendations will take us quite a bit of investment in time and energy. And then in year 3, then we would revise the course pacing guides and bring them back to you for approval again. Then in year 3, we would add in those resources that we looked at in year 2, continuing monitoring the curriculum and learning labs, and then revising our course pacing guides, always working towards a continual cycle of improvement. And then year 4, continuing monitoring the curriculum now that we've had a full year of our resource under our belts. And then we would continue to revise, again, always that continuous cycle of improvement, and then we would look at starting the cycle again.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So there's a pretty big change in there to me. I'm assuming it's a big change, which is really developing the curriculum first and then acquiring the resource. And do you mind just kind of briefly talking a little bit about that and kind of the significance? Because we kind of did the opposite way historically in this district, I think, where we would acquire a resource and then develop a curriculum around that resource.
Yes. So what the curriculum audit helped provide was a little bit of this roadmap as well. And the idea is that we begin with the standards and we backward plan from the standards. And so we decide what is it that kids need to be able to know, do, and understand first. And then we map that out, and then we seek out the resource that helps us do that. And no one resource will be perfect. We would always need to think about how we can provide the best resources for our students. But it's really more about a curriculum adoption cycle with starting with the standards and backwards planning, rather than sometimes in some places, curriculum and the textbook are synonymous, and that's something that we're going to be working on, maybe breaking away from a little bit, or clarifying, I guess, is a better way of saying it, so that we can be sure to make sure that we are meeting the standards rather than the goals of a textbook. If that makes sense. I just wanted to show you, show you the difference between our current layout of our curriculum pacing guides and then just a quick sample layout. So our current layout, if you look, this is our current integrated Math 1 Course 1 pacing guide. And as you can see, it has many, many important features. It has our philosophy instruction. It has our overall scope and sequence. And then it breaks it down into the blocks, the unit blocks, the estimated time frame, enduring understandings, our learning targets. So here are our targets, and here are standards. And then key terms, so our academic vocabulary, the resources that are needed, the assessment, and then essential learning and rationale. And then there's also in here possible additional common lessons that teachers can click on to help them. And then in some places, there's this district-wide common lesson that all teachers would teach. In a sample layout we were given from CMSI, you'll see many of the same features. So overview of the unit, the number of days. They provide a calendar. The big ideas we have as enduring understandings. The building blocks, they have texts, which are their standards because this is Texas. And then their big ideas. here's one feature where we're a little bit different. They have alignment to previous grade levels here, and then alignment to future grade levels. They have learning experiences. So what possible learning experiences might students have there? And then they have some things like differentiation and extensions. If it's pre-AP, what might that look like? Scaffolds. Tips for student success, which is a nice feature. Looking at possible misconceptions in the unit. And evidence for learning. Technology. Assessment, which we had academic vocabulary, which we had resource materials, and the standards. So you'll see many of the same features, and then some that are a little bit different. So we're really working on slowing down the process of curriculum development by embedding it in our teachers' calendar year. And so some of the deliverables that we're working on first are the standards, progressions, and learning targets, making sure that we're doing a good job of aligning those. The sequencing of our units, our assessments, our enrichment and remediation strategies, our resource and text alignment, instructional strategies, and final review and revisions before our school board. So those are some of the things the teachers are going to be responsible creating over time. And then as we tinker toward perfection, because we're never exactly going to be there, but we're always going to work to get there. We're looking at different ways of getting feedback. So first is external feedback from our community, our board, external agencies, perhaps CMSI again, things like the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, looking at their standards and practices, et cetera. Then our own internal feedback loop, looking at what teachers have to say, what administrators have to say, how is it going. Our third feedback loop, I will argue, is the most important. That is the feedback loop of parent and student voice, making sure that we are meeting student needs through our curriculum and gathering information about how well we're doing with students from them. And then the fourth is just looking at our data, our assessment data, qualitative data, data that shows us things like the ISAT, the SAT, et cetera. And that is our plan for moving forward. What questions can I answer?
I do have a question. So has the auditors of CMSI given you some places to go for some of the curriculum that was done right?
So I have contacted them, and they're in a little bit of a quandary for helping us out with that. I'm still hopeful that we can get some. Are you speaking specifically about integrated math? Yeah. So they're in a little bit of a quandary because they don't collect those materials. I'm still hopeful that they can help us out with that, but I have reached out to them, and hopefully they can assist us. They will be coming here on October 28th, 29th, and 30th to give us some training on building when I showed you the course pacing guide, they're going to help us build our own Coeur d'Alene version of that. So we're excited to have their input. I did show Holly Captain. She is the CEO of Curriculum Management. She's the one who will be coming here in October. And she liked what we were thinking about and what we're planning forward. She did say our timeline is a little aggressive, but I think we're in a good place.
Could you go back to that slide that had kind of the timeline, like the ideal, going back, that one?
Okay.
So I like this model going forward. Clearly we have a lot of curriculum that needs to be evaluated. This is I'm guessing, our number one priority. So is this the timeline that you would anticipate utilizing going forward? So let's say we're going to take on English language arts next. So if we were to look forward, we'd say, okay, in year one, you guys are writing the curriculum. No students are partaking in this curriculum. Year two, revising your course pacing guides, and then maybe you're having some sampling going on where 2 courses are using the curriculum that's been written in the prior year. I'm just kind of thinking forward if this is a model that would be applicable to revision of future curriculums.
Right now, yes. We're going to learn lessons from this first year of implementation with this group, and so we will learn things that will also impact the cycle. But right now, yes, that would be what I would hope for.
Yeah, I think this is great. You know, I have to be honest, I have a lot of heartburn sitting here, a lot of angst. This is the model that we should have used prior to implementing curriculum that probably wasn't ready. And so, you know, I find myself sitting here feeling frustrated that, you know, we're talking about this as if we're writing this curriculum, that no students are partaking in this curriculum, but that's simply not the case that we're in. And so I hear your heartburn about the timeline in revising this curriculum. Well, I also have heartburn, and I think I probably share that heartburn. And I feel that this has to be an aggressive timeline to remedy where we are going forward. And so if you could provide us, you know, I think Dr. Cottle was last year, we were getting math updates, and it included a timeline. I think we're going to a new model, but something like that we can share with the community if they ask us. So we can give them correct information on what to anticipate going forward.
So, yes. So with that timeline, are you hoping for something that looks like this, or are you hoping for when we would look at each?
Well, I think we discussed maybe, you know, you're hopeful that you're going to bring us these revised course pacing guides for for 1 year approval. You know, we're negotiating the month that they come to us, whether it's May or June. But I think it has to be this year for Math 1, 2, and 3. I know it's aggressive timeline for you, but I don't think we have any other luxury for this situation. Going forward, I think this looks like a fantastic model, and you guys can adapt it and tweak it. But I think the most important thing is that when we're writing curriculum, we are not implementing it. And as a board member, I've learned a lot in this process. I would not approve curriculum again unless this model was in place. And so I like this. We can't go back and we can't look in the rears, and we're only looking forward. But for this process, we must move expeditiously, in my opinion.
And one thing too is in going forward, because for a lot of different reasons, we started this process with these teachers in October, but I will be looking for the next cycle to start recruiting teachers in May, and we would begin this work over the summer. So that would be a change and would speed up, move the whole cycle shift it by several months.
And my last question, you mentioned that when we finish, you know, you kind of finish your last revision of the pacing guides. Is it something that CMSI would, because we had significant findings, that they would come back and reevaluate that, or are you going to utilize potentially other resources in our community? You mentioned a couple that I wasn't familiar with that could look at the final product and kind of give us feedback if needed.
I'm not sure if we would use CMSI or exactly who would be involved in a future curriculum audit or review or evaluation. I do know that CMSI is part of bringing them in. They are providing us with consultation hours, so we'll be able to draw upon their expertise as we design this curriculum moving forward.
I'd like to suggest that we do updates just on how the training is going, because one of the things that we'd be getting kind of 2 birds with 1 stone is this is really the very first kind of beta version of this mechanism for writing curriculum, and we're using the Math Academy as our kind of starting point. I would suggest that would be a great opportunity for us to present those updates to you monthly or as often as they're meeting, and talk about how the work's going forward. That'd give you feedback on, first of all, how the process is working, and then secondly, it would keep you kind of lockstep in tune with the work that we're doing in creating the full pathway of integrated math as we work through this year's process. So we'd be glad to present that information to you monthly or so.
Because I do know, we haven't followed up on it because everybody's just been, on pause until we receive this data, and now we have it. And so one thing we didn't follow up on were our end of course assessments for Math 1 last year, and we know that the assessments were not where we want them to be. So I think we're going to have to, at least I would like to see some sort of, even the feedback that we got is that the assessment wasn't aligned to the state standards. When we rewrite that assessment, I'm imagining that will happen this year, but are you going to be updating us on end of course assessments again, so we can, have some feedback and we know how it's going, so we can kind of confidently tell the community, yeah, we're aware, they're keeping us informed. Is that something that's realistic, or?
So just to clarify, are you speaking of the end of course assessments that we're giving in the 2019-20 school year, or the?
Well, I'm guessing you're using the same ones this year because you haven't rewritten them.
Correct.
Is that correct?
And I think it would be maybe a little bit of bait and switch at this point to change those end of course assessments right now, because those are what we've entered the school year with, and frankly, we're not at a point yet where we're able to probably invest the time that would be needed to revise them for this year to the level that would be needed. But that is part of this plan for this Math Academy, is that they will be looking at the end of course assessments and revising them and making them stronger and more aligned to the standards.
So do you anticipate that any part of the curriculum will change in this school calendar year from last year? Or are we going to be teaching the exact same Math 1 and Math 2? Or I guess Math 2 was just approved this year, but Math 1 will be the same as it was last year.
Well, before we would be able to change anything, we would need to write something and bring it before you. And I think that would be maybe doubling our efforts, and when really what we want to be doing is investing all of our time and energy into making sure that we're writing the most high quality curriculum we can, and then we'll be able to unroll that for the 2020-2021 school year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Speaking of math, here's some math data. I see Dr. Nelson coming up to the podium.
Hello there, Chair
Good evening.
Morris Rowe. Get back to slide number 1, Superintendent Cook and members of the board. As we have looked at our transition into the integrated approach, one of the guarantees that we made to our trustees and to our community is that we would progress monitor our students in this transition. We've been doing such with the NWEA MAP growth assessments, and I'd like to share with you today how our students performed. We had about 2,000 students take these high school equivalent courses, starting in our 8th grade ALP courses and moving all the way through even into senior year. These were for our traditional math paths, so they stopped at Algebra 2, which would be our traditional entry-level course pathway. Does not include pre-calculus, calculus, statistics, AP courses, or such. So we're looking at how students are progressing through. Overall, I'd like to remind you that our NWEA MAP assessments are norm-referenced assessments. So these are not criterion referenced. They are not necessarily looking at specific standards. What they are doing is looking at maturation, at growth. Think of like the growth charts that you had with your children growing up. Well, you can see where your students are progressing toward meeting their overall goals. In this case, our district is using 3 different windows. We use a September window, a November-December window to tie in timely results for conferences, and then we also use an end-of-year window, which will actually be this year in March, excluding all of the ISAT window. That was one of the concerns that we had last year, that our staff said we were really emphasizing assessments toward the end of the year. So this will be a good opportunity for us to be able to watch students going into the summative assessment. And the ISAT is criterion referenced. It is based off of specific standards. So this does give us a nice opportunity to watch growth and then ultimately see how students perform at the end of the year. Overall, let's take a look at how our students are performing. First of all, let's take a look at our 8th grade students in ALP Math 1. These are, again, our advanced students who are taking a high school equivalent course in the 8th grade year. A couple of numbers that you'll see on the screen just to navigate you along the way. If you look at the yellow bar, you'll notice the month of September when this assessment was provided. At the top of the bar, you'll see our district's mean average for this particular window. And in the 8th graders this year, our mean average was 245.8. What does that mean? Well, if you look at the bar that goes across, the average nationally for 8th grade students is 226.3. So our students, who are 8th graders, outperformed the national average or the national mean for this particular assessment. Certainly that would make sense for us, as these are our advanced students taking a grade level assessment. So again, on here you'll be able to see that, the overall national average in those 3 windows that I talked about. You'll also be able to see a look at how our students are performing, and underneath the graphs as well, I put the actual growth that we would expect from a typical 8th grade student in this case. So the typical student would grow about 4.6 RIT points for this year in 8th grade. We'll walk through this kind of along the way as we get closer. Here's our 9th grade students. Again, the national average was 230.3 for a 9th grade student. Our students in Coeur d'Alene achieved a 234.4, which would indicate about, over the national average, about 1 year better than the national average if you look at those average RIT scores. Average RIT score for a 9th grade student does decline down from 4.2 in an 8th grader to 3.1, and you'll notice that that will go down year to year to year to year, where we typically see most growth for students in the early primary years into middle school, and in the high school years that line does flatten a little bit nationally. Taking a look at our first group of students in Math 2, the first year that that course has been offered, students outperformed the national average, 238.1 over 230.1. Total sample size in this particular assessment was 361. And again, you'll notice that the average growth for a 10th grade student does again decrease this year to an expected 2.3 points. And finally, for Algebra 2, 328 students took this course, or took this assessment in this course. The national average, 233, our students, 244.6. Overall, we should be fairly pleased with how our students are performing comparative to national averages, but there are some values behind those data that we want to expose you to as well. If we look at the mean average, just as that bar, how are our students overall performing? This chart gives us an opportunity to take a look at the percentage of students at or above the national mean, and that percentage of students below the national mean. I'm going to start at the very bottom of the graph and take a look at the school district as a whole. In the 9th graders, 68.6% of our students were at or above the national mean, where 31% were below. If we continue that down as a sophomore, 69.7% were above, 30% below. That number continues to decline down even into the junior years, 70.3% above, 29.7% below. You do see some variability between high schools as well. You can see some of the differences between the percentage of students at and above the mean at Coeur d'Alene High School, Lake City High School, and Venture High School along the way. I'd also like to direct your attention to this graph, or this table. I'm going to keep it up for a moment and then present it to you in a hopefully easier to absorb way. This table also gives us the national quintiles. So if you look at the percentages of students in 20% gaps, you would see that as a district, 6% of our 9th graders are in the lowest quintile nationally. That number goes to 16% in the low average, 21% in average, and then completely 57% in the high average or high categories. And we also put the total count in there for you. taking this data and just putting it into an easier to understand bar graph, you'll be able to see the differences here. If you look at the differences between Coeur d'Alene, Lake City, and Ventura High School, Coeur d'Alene High School tends to have more students in the high and high average. Lake City High School has more students in the high average, and then Ventura High School into the average and low average area for this particular fall assessment. So at this particular point, now that we have this data, what do we plan to do with it? We made a commitment to you and the community that we would provide parent and family reports. We still will be doing that. Our data is going to be shared with secondary principals tomorrow. We'll have an opportunity to talk with them and then look at how we plan to get that data out. If we do provide the November-December window as well, that means that if we continue that via conferences, we would have 2 data points to be able to share with parents and guardians for parent and teacher conferences. So that would be a nice, meaty conversation and hopefully encourage lots of participation with that. If we also decide as a district, this is the brand new family report that has come out. It's a little bit cleaner, easier to use. And we'll take a look at that with our administrators and teams starting tomorrow and really find out what's going to be the best way for us to provide that information to students, families as cleanly as possible. The final thing is that we did hold professional development for our content teachers in mathematics, reading, and language usage just this last week, and had an opportunity to remind them that there are a lot of great instructional tools within this as well. Even though we started in math, we piloted other subjects this year, and it gives us an opportunity to be able to have a class list based on RIT. So it will tell you specifically how my son or daughter is performing, but it will also say, these are the things that I need to be introduced. These are the things that I probably need to be developing right now and expanding a little bit more. And these are the things that I'm really quite a good student on and as an expert on. These reports are very user-friendly and provide a lot of detail for our content teachers to really differentiate and personalize that instruction as needed. Ultimately, I think we can be pleased with what we've seen so far, but at the same time, the proof is in the pudding, and it's my hope that for our next distribution, we can show you some good growth coming up in the next couple of months. Any questions that I can answer?
I just had a basic question. The Math 1 for grade 8 from Lakes, are those students taking Math 1 at Lakes, or where are they? We
have a brand new math teacher at Lakes who is teaching ALP Math 1, correct?
Oh, okay.
There is a Math 1 teacher at each of our middle schools.
And so is it just one section of Math 1 kind of? Or is
I need to take a look at how many. I believe there are 2 sections, but I will confirm that back to you via email.
Dr. Nelson, how is this information, I know it's new for us, or new last year for us, but how are teachers using it, I guess, to guide instruction? Is that universal across the district? Is it kind of pick and choose, and some are using it and some aren't?
That's a tough one for me to answer. However, I can tell you that our emphasis has been bringing our teachers together and showing them the power that this does provide them. I unfortunately can't be in every building, but I will tell you that we are emphasizing that with our building administrators as well tomorrow. There are a lot of things in here that not only tell us how students are progressing toward meeting standards, but their college and career readiness. It's a very deep tool, but it's also important that it's not just to pay for an assessment to be able to provide it and get data. It's also to be able to inform that instruction.
Yeah, and how are we communicating this information to parents? You know, since we're having windows, it'd be nice if we're not waiting till the end of the quarter to release this data. It's something like you said that, you know, if a student's struggling, that we could get them help, or a parent could identify, oh, my child's got some needs that we need.
Well, the parent reports are going to be provided now. They're going to be printed out and provided with the student to be able to come home. We'll also have communication that'll go out via email saying your son or daughter should be providing this to you. If for whatever reason, you know, the dog chews it up, something like that, where we can get an extra copy for you. But it's important to us to also communicate that growth for parents and guardians as well. So we'll have an initial report that'll go out now, and then we'll hopefully have a second report that will be provided at conferences. If it's not picked up at conferences, we'll make sure that we send it home in a similar way.
And because paper's hard hard to track? Is it something that we could incorporate or embed into our app? Like, I know you're trying to get all those great. Is this something that the parent could just log in and see their student scores if the paper happens to get lost?
That's a bugaboo. Unfortunately, to be able to upload anything into our student management system, Skyward, it has to be connected with a student ID. And the reports that are generated from MAP are a generic report ID. So the only way that we'd be able to do it is to upload one by one. And did I mention there was about 2,000 people who took this? We are working with MAP. We have put in a product enhancement request so that they could do that. And I am seeing if there's a way for us to extract that off of the report somehow. But for right now, we do not have an electronic posting option.
Do you have a plan for finding out if teachers are using it, or anticipate looking into that once you've had a little more time with it under your belt and determining who is and isn't, and those that are, is it useful, and those that aren't, why they shouldn't be?
There's a lot of questions that I think we can ask this, and that's why we're bringing our secondary principals together tomorrow. The first has to do with environment, right? If we don't set the expectations well for this as students, they're not going to take it seriously. And we are taking this data seriously, and we need to make sure that they know that as well. And then the accountability piece that you're talking about, that is something that we definitely are going to be talking tomorrow about, is, again, it's not just the fact that we have a number to associate with a student. We now want to see that student grow to their potential. And when you talk about a student who has a RIT score of 215, that doesn't tell you a whole lot. What it does tell you is that this student can do this, needs to work on this, and can grow in this area. That's the more powerful of the conversations. I don't know that I have a method or a mechanism at this particular point to measure how teachers are using that data, but that's something that I can collaborate with our team and try to find out for you what's the best way for us to be able to have some sort of follow-through.
I think so much of the curricular audit talked about the aspects of accountability and how, and particularly now when we're looking at this new idea of even our own budget, looking to support systems that work and not doing things that don't work anymore. And so I think it would be really helpful if this is going to, to determine if, teachers are using it, one, and two, do they find it helpful to know then as the budget process, would we continue it or would we not? I think it all kind of goes together, but it strikes me that not certainly a reasonable expectation right now, but certainly after like the second year to have some understanding of after this. Is it we're going into our second, right? That's what I mean. Like after this year, being able to look back and say, these are the tools we're going to go with into the third year to know, are they using it? Who's using it? And did they find it helpful over the last 2 years?
Thank you. And I think we can use those questions to guide us. But I'll have to come back to you upon it.
This is a random question, but I remember when we approved this, it talked about reading, but I didn't see any reading MAP scores in here.
Correct. This is a pilot year for us. Our secondary principals agreed to pilot reading and language usage. We do have the data, and that's, again, one of the topics that we'll talk about with our secondary principals. They haven't seen it yet, even though we've sent it to them electronically. We want to kind of guide them through it since it's for an assessment. I can certainly have the data for you in board memo or certainly be glad to present it publicly for you. But it is a pilot for us, so we did have differing levels of usage and involvement. But at the same time, I think it is data rich for us to be able to take a look at as well.
I think the board memo would be nice.
No problem. Anything else I can provide you?
Thank you, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you.
Okay, on to item H, facility update, and Scott Maven's going to come out and go over this with us. Good evening, Scott.
Good evening, Chairman Morrisroe, members of the board, Superintendent Cook. Mr. Voller sends his apologies. He's not unable to join us this evening, but I'm happy to share with you some of the photos that he has been taking in recent days at our two remaining job sites. That would be, of course, the Prairie Elementary build, and also the Lakes Middle School. which is now in the final stretch, the home stretch. There we go. That's where I was trying to go. So the last time I think we showed you some images, we were just preparing to unpack those boxes of books and fill those shelves in the library. The media center at Lakes is now open and pretty impressive. I haven't been there since they got to that phase, but it'd be great to go back and get some photos of students using that facility now. Looks pretty comfortable. Here's the main, the vestibule at Lakes with the security window in place. This one is fairly dramatic contrast to what we saw just a few weeks ago, where it was fairly torn up, and we had, I think some of you toured it when it was just a dirt and rock floor. I mean, they completely gutted the locker rooms, and it's kind of hard to tell, but there's two photos there, so you're seeing both the girls' and the boys' locker rooms now completed. So happy to report that the additional parking project is underway. The plan is to have it paved by the end of this week. And I think that's adding 29 spaces out front. There will be some landscaping that needs to happen as well. So within the next couple of weeks, that should be finished. Moving on to our Prairie Avenue site, you can see the footings and some of those underground water lines are now in place, so ready for the foundation. Just kind of another view of that. Some foundation walls have actually started to go up, and then we'll see the blocks coming in for walls on the gymnasium first. It should be seeing that here in the next week or two. And then finally, the kind of a quick update on the median work there on Prairie. So we are, JUB Engineering now is completing final review on those plans. Remember, that's a controlled access there in front of the school. I believe it's right in, left in, and right out as a control. Does that sound right? So that project will go out to bid here within about a month, and construction is expected to begin in the spring. Jeff did all the heavy lifting on this. And he said to take great notes if you have some technical questions.
Okay. Any questions for Jeff, who's not here?
Yeah, send Jeff a question for me. Is he worried about a big snow year? Are they going to get the Prairie School in this situation? I mean, makes us. I know they have it all sorted out.
I'm sure they've been talking about the forecasts and the old Farmer's Almanac and all that good stuff. But you know, they anymore around here, they go right through the winter. And I think once they get walls up and they can get covered, they'll be doing quite a bit of work in the winter and spring in the interior. So
It's, you know, once it starts going up, then it goes pretty quick, right? There's a lot of early work to be done.
Right.
Getting the site ready.
Right. We'll have a camera out there capturing the progress. So we'll be eager to show that to you.
Time lapse.
Time lapse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Miranda.
you.
Okay. Speaking of the home stretch, we're in the home stretch here. And we have kind of the final information item here, I think, and it's a lot of policy. It's a lot of policies that were in there.
Should we just chunk it up?
Yeah, we can chunk them up. You know, the first one was just some clarification stuff that needed to be done just with the changes in the annual meeting. And I think Ms. Town handled that. I would say this next one probably just needs our attention, which is 3,500. It's a revised policy based on the services that Heritage Health are going to be providing with their mobile health center and visiting our schools. As you know, that was at Venture previously, and now it's been expanded. I think we approved that last month to expand that to both Coeur d'Alene High School and Lake City High School with a condition on a form, basically a consent form for the parents. And so that was in here. And all these policies are going out for information. But if there's questions, suggestions on those, we can do that. So do we want to talk about 3,500 first? I see Nurse Nicole here.
We should just text you when it's getting close.
I think she likes coming. She comes so much, and she always stays for the whole thing. I think she just...
She gets brownie points from
All
that.
right. I'll say on the consent form, I just got to find it here. I made some notes.
1081 of mine, but is yours the same?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see where I'm at here. What is it, 35?
Yeah, 6 to 8.
I skipped divide here.
8.
Oh. Thank you. Let's see. I thought I appreciated what we did there. I thought maybe we had overcomplicated that a little bit.
The consent form?
Yes. And I guess I'll just put kind of what I had in my mind, and was really that we're allowing parents, yes, my child can participate, or no, my child can't. I guess is what I envisioned. If we want, I'm on 3,500 F1. Yeah, I think it was
F1-3?
F1-2. And I made some notes here, but this is the one where it says, I want my child to participate in school-based health program, and then there's a kind of sub-check under that, only with a parent or guardian present, or independently with parent notification. It's basically, and I just, and Trustee May and I talked about this earlier, the parent present, it seems like that's going to be a roadblock for a lot of these appointments, because obviously parents aren't at school with those kids. So as I had envisioned this form, I thought kind of a my child can participate kind of at their leisure, at their choice. And then my child can participate, but I want to be informed when they do. So that's what I envisioned. And I don't know what you all think about that. Or I do not. Right. I just see, like, that's a whole nother layer. Now we got to schedule, and we got to get parents there, and what's that look like? And I think if you want to be there for your child's appointment, then maybe you should schedule that with Heritage or one of the other providers.
So I just want to make sure I've got that.
And that's just my idea.
I just want to make sure I clearly understand what you just said. You're saying, I want my child to participate in the school-based health program, and then there's two options on that, either independently of my knowledge or with my notification.
I think, do they have to be independent? Can they just be their own standing statements? Because it gets into that parents not really understanding what we're asking. Could just be three options. I think how Casey said the first time, I want my child to participate, and that's at their, I want my child to participate, but I want to be notified, or I do not want my child to participate.
Yeah, I mean, what I wrote in my notes was with notification. So I want my child to participate with prior notification, and then I want my child to participate without, or I'll allow my child to participate without prior notification.
Independently.
Yeah.
You want it to be prior notification.
That's
I
current
don't know that it
practice.
does- It doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you, yeah, right. You see the attorney's mind swirling here.
That's funny. So I think if a parent, so we know what the law is, and that says that, you know, they're entitled to services at age 14.
Yeah.
So if we, certain services. So if we send this notice out and we have these, yes, you can participate, but only with notice, but then the student has the right to do that without notice. So they do that and we don't notify the parent, where are we?
So, right. So I think you're right. The statute does allow them that, and that's part of the reason this has taken so long that
Yeah,
we've
that's why
discussed this.
it's difficult.
But we don't have to provide those services on our campus, right? And so
But
we
we
do have
do-
the right to those services, but we don't have to provide them at our school, right? Or we don't.
But I mean, there are some that we are providing that they're entitled to, that they don't have to give parents notice, just general health, which is what I understand we're providing. And so to the extent that we're sending out a notice that says, I consent as long as I'm notified, and the student says, I'm doing this on my own, don't notify, where does that leave us? Ah, yes.
Chairman Murray-Rowe, Superintendent Cook, members of the board, thank you. I think for me, the distinction there is that in that case, I would not be providing a referral as a school nurse. So I would not be directly sending them out to Heritage Health bus services. If the child accesses those services on their own time, I have not provided a direct referral. And to be frank, I might, if a student asks me questions about how to access services on their own time, that's a question that we might encounter. I mean, this would be a conversation with a student, but I would not be providing them with a direct route to access those services on our school property. In follow-up to a little bit of that discussion with only with a parent guardian present or independently once notified, we took that language, modeled that off of Heritage Health's current practice, and they were asking parents when they enrolled patients if they wanted to be present with their student or if they wanted their student to seek services independently after notified. I agree with your conversation about it being simplified and increasing access to services if we were to just allow independent with notification, or however the board decides, independent altogether.
And I'm just reading directly from Idaho Code here, and I see what Trustee Brumley's mentioning. I mean, I see the point that it's our land, and we're entering into a contract with Heritage Health. So can we mandate that Heritage Health not follow Idaho Code? And it's only certain services that we're really referring to, but there are two sets of services that are clearly protected for minors to seek care, or not 14, without parent consent. So are we violating? And have we gotten to the bottom of that? I mean, I hear that we think we are, but I don't know, are we? I think it's a valid question.
I think our policy is about our referral process, and I think our referral process would allow us to respect the parent's decision on that, on how, as a school district employee, I assist a student to access the system. I don't think that we're writing a policy about denying a student a service if they seek that service themselves.
Let me clarify one thing, if I may, with that. One of the reasons this took so long was exactly Trustee May's point there, and that is that by all rights, we can't deny them access. But what we can do is deny them access to the agreement that we have set up based upon using through the MOU that we would develop with Heritage Health, access to that facility on our property. And that's why this got so entangled and so confusing, because legally that's a tough place for Heritage Health to be in, because legally if a kid says, hey, I need help on this, they have the right to provide them that support. The challenge gets to be, how do you have the agreement between the two entities while honoring what the law provides and also honoring parents' right to give consent on the services they want their kid to be a part of. And so that's the kind of threading the needle that we've tried to do, which is some parents are going to say, yeah, my kid can go do that, but they need to go to Heritage Health or they need to go to the health department to get those services. Or in some cases, in this case, we're saying we want to provide that opportunity for care on our property and with parents' involvement in whatever manner they personally deem fit would be the mechanism for us to provide those services for kids at our schools.
Couldn't a parent show up there and then the kid could still say, yeah, I don't want my parent to be present, correct? Or
That is correct.
Yes.
yeah,
That is correct.
So
Or releasing documents. I mean, just
Yeah.
because they are notified doesn't mean they get access to that child's chart.
information.
I think what's confusing, and I see what you're saying, but I see, and if I'm misinterpreting your point, Jen, let me know, but I think a student could make the case that you're providing services, and just because my mom or dad said that I can't go out there, other students are receiving that care that by law I'm protected to receive. And if that was challenged, I would be curious whether our agreement supersedes that or not. I don't know. I think it's something that's like you said, it's threading a needle. I'm happy with simplifying the consent. Going forward, it may be something that we encounter and to be aware of.
I would. I don't want to invite conflict, but I think providing the service is going to be of benefit. And if a child, I shouldn't say a child, if a 14-year-old or over wants to challenge that, I think the worthiness of the program warrants almost a willingness to say, okay, there's a gray spot here. We're trying to support the needs of kids, and there's some tricky space there. And Heritage Health has recognized that in this conversation with us, that there's kind of there's some space that this doesn't have a really super quick and easy answer. You know, what do you do if a parent says, no, I don't want my kid out there? Kid walks out of the school and then just walks in there. Are the Heritage Health staff going to deny care? That's a tough one.
The other last tricky position I see is that we're going to say that we're going to notify prior to care these parents. So I think we need to be very clear in this policy and procedure that just because we notify them of care doesn't mean they have access to their student's medical record, and that's between the provider and state statute. But I can see some parents saying, well, I know my kid went out there on Monday and I want to know what went on. So we need to protect, and I'm sure that's Heritage Health has that, under their HIPAA guidelines, but I think it's difficult. I can see that being a gray area. How do you anticipate handling those calls?
Some of that has been handled in the conversations that the students, for example, Connie is the nurse at Venture, and so when she's working with students can come in and request that they see the nurse practitioner on the Heritage Health bus. And if they may not be forthcoming with why they need to see the nurse practitioner on the Heritage Health bus. So part of it would eliminate the conflict there with the nurse and the parent, in that the nurse doesn't even have the information potentially. In conversation and interview, we can talk with the student and find out these are some of the things that they provide on the bus. Are these some of the services that you're in need of today? With the school health records, I don't know actually how to answer that. The quick answer on this for me is that as a school nurse, I am entering information in their school record. And so that would be very important in how I'm writing that information if the parent has access, unrestricted access to their child's educational record. Whereas with HIPAA, which is what the Heritage Health bus is going to be handling, that's part of their normal practice. So even with pediatrician's office in town, when I take my child to the pediatrician of a certain age, I'm notified I no longer have a right to their records. And Heritage Health, I think, would have those or share those same stances with parents.
Yeah, I think we just need to educate our staff so whoever receives that phone call, they have the appropriate, response. Because it could be, I can see that phone call coming.
It strikes me that it's a deferral to Heritage Health. That we don't house those records, we don't have those records, and therefore it's not our call.
Yeah, we would do some education with our nursing staff that we would probably document that the student is going to be seen for evaluation.
Because that's interesting. So if a patient or a student is seen by our school nurse, we input that into the record. But if they go out to Heritage Health, then it's not included in their school record.
Correct. And that's part of the MOU agreement.
Perfect.
I mean, you could, if you look at that particular page, there's one consent for the health-based program. There's another one for mental health, and it's simplified yet. My kid can or my kid can't. And you certainly could do that. My concern, I guess, with that, I think you're going to get more can'ts if you don't do it that way. I think having kind of the 3 tiers, they can without notice, they can with notice. I think you start catching more kids that will be able to access the service. The notice would come from the nurse, I assume, and would be so-and-so's in the office today, and they've requested to...
phone call first.
Right.
That would be our preference, to actually talk to the parent and have a discussion with them of some degree. And if not available, then we would notify them that they're here requesting to go to Heritage Health. So that leaves it open as well. Are we looking for their approval or their notification?
We don't really want to delay if they need
Correct.
help right away, waiting to make a connection with the parent. So that.
Would it be possible, we're talking about evaluating programs, this is another program that we're going to need to evaluate how effective it is as we expand it. So when that school nurse, could she keep a log, just a generic log without names, and maybe quarterly we look at how many students that parents check that they want to be notified. Okay, we notified them. How many of them were able to receive care that day? How many were not? So then we could get an idea of how this procedure.
Yes, I definitely think so, and that's what we were looking at too for an annual committee for process evaluation types of materials. How many students attempted to access the system? How many students were able to access the system, and what was their satisfaction or their response? Would they utilize the service again? Were their needs addressed in a timely manner?
And this form would be an annual form, is that correct? Consistent with our like technology fund, and those ones that you have to do through Skyward.
Yes.
So you're giving that authority for the year.
Yes.
Basically.
So if we look at that 3-prong that you're talking about, are you thinking that should also be under the mental health services, and we develop this, and that it's, or are we having 2 different forms?
The form says 912 for both. But.
I didn't know if we were going to move on to the mental health, or I just thought I'd bring it in since we're talking about a very, yes, all or none kind of standard for mental health, but would we want the same standard for both? And maybe you could answer why the difference.
We do find that some families are more receptive to physical health care than they are mental health care, and some families are more protective and resistant with accessing mental health care. And so there does seem to be a distinction between preference, and that we do believe some families would be able to participate. We would increase participation if we have 2 separate forms.
Okay, so then would you suggest to make it as inclusive as possible if we were going to do the 3-prong, having the 3-prong under the mental health that says not having it the all or none, but that they could opt in with notice?
So the mental health seems to be organized slightly differently. So one of the things that we might consider is that if a student were to access mental health services, they would probably have a triage or an assessment of some sort. And then from there, a treatment plan would be developed to have, say, 3 to 6 visits in the next month or 3 months, and a check back in. And the physical health services at the bus might be strep throat this week, and then a completely different question, issue, education point. In 3 months, it could be pink eye. And so it's accessing the same service, but it is an entirely different notification. And so the mental health services tends to be episodic, if you will. And with some of our students, they're doing, well, I think I'll leave it at that with episodic. If I'm seeing some head shaking, so that seems to make sense.
Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, but in mental health, anyway, I think the state statute that the provider's mandated to contact parents if a child is under, is it 16 maybe, or 14? But I feel like there's already a duty to notify.
Yes, and we know that when we're talking about K-5 children, that if we're going to have an effective impact, we need to involve the family.
I just want to say thank you. I know this has been a very difficult policy and procedure. We got it?
Are we, where are we on that change? Are we in agreement of that kind of three-pronged approach in making that change for what's going to be out for public comment for the next 30 days? Do we want to stick with what was there?
Are you comfortable with the change?
Okay, Ms. Brumley?
Well, since I know we're not adopting it right now, so
Correct.
I am interested in the community's feedback on the existing form. I guess that's what I was processing, was do I want to change it for it to go out for public comment, or keep it as is, knowing what our dialogue has been?
You would have to go back out again, though, if we changed it. I'm not currently comfortable with the form for 9 to 12, just for the non-mental health, the general health form. I think it's going to put barriers up to healthcare.
Perhaps it would be helpful to share that while Heritage Health had this as their standard, they had no parents come in. And that could be talking to the student population, but also to the fact that, like you said, if a parent is going to come in with a child, I take that back. One mom did come in, kind of serendipitously type of thing. So oftentimes if it's going to be planned, a parent might use their traditional primary care provider.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in agreement with Ms. May, I guess, that the form as it is here, I'm a no. I think that's what Ms. May was saying, but you know, to me, it's just a big enough difference there that I just see several issues with it in its current form. So I would prefer to see the edit.
The three-prong, that's what you want to do. I'm okay with that. I'm
It'll
just
be out
thinking
for
out
the 30
loud.
days. And
What about
Yeah.
the mental health services? Okay.
I'm okay with that. I just have more heartburn over the health-based stuff. I just see that as more controversial, even though it's hard to imagine that is. I see it as.
Mental health leave as is, but add the three-prong approach to the physical.
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Don't get up anybody yet. We've got a few more policies here to go.
I feel like there's too many to me.
There is a lot, and they're here for information. I think
Don't go far, Nicole.
I'll kind of briefly go over the summaries of these, but 4110 was just a change that I suggested just in policy title as I was looking at a bunch of other districts around this concept of public complaints and public grievances, and yes, it needed a change in my opinion. So that's all that one was. Let's see, there were some Oh, yeah. There was a bunch of, I think it was from last board meeting or maybe two, where we talked about adding nicotine where we had tobacco. And as you see, that's about 20 policies that got to get changed there.
And also the sexually transmitted.
Yes.
Yeah, as well, just to broaden it.
25. Okay. So those will be out for the next 30 days for public comment. They'll be back for action next month. If you have anything in there you notice, why don't you just try to let Lynn know between now and then, or bring it with you next month, and we'll see those then.
I want to thank Nicole for the work on policy 3500 and the change to this. This has been 15 months we've been working on this.
Okay, just a reminder, we've got a busy month ahead of us. So next Monday, we have our joint meeting with Long Range Planning, and Lisa and I were at agenda planning for that today, and I think we're on a pretty good track to have a productive meeting there. 3 weeks from today, we'll have our Zone 5 interviews with our applicants for that position. That's the 28th, so 3 weeks. 5 p.m. I think the long range planning is 4:45. Yeah, 4:30 is when their meeting starts, but they have a little bit of business to do to start, and then we'll be around 4:45.
Can I clarify something with Lynn? If we only have one applicant for the zone, do we still do an interview process?
Yes, because you can, we have, because of our timing on this, we'd have a couple of choices. If we had one applicant, we could do the interview, we could extend the application deadline and get more. You don't have to pick someone out of your, without the timing we have, we wouldn't have to pick someone. So let's say we had 6 applicants, we went through the interview and we didn't pick someone out of that, we could have another application window. I think that'd be a little sticky, but theoretically you could do that. Then November 4th, we'll have our monthly board meeting. That same week, we have ISBA convention here in town. And sometime in November, we haven't set the firm date on that, but we'll have our flow session, our session with the flow folks. And we're going to come up with some of those kind of guiding principles that'll at least trigger the springboard proposals.
And weren't you thinking earlier, like the first 2 weeks of November, that would probably happen?
Yeah, we'll try to get that wrapped up pretty quick. We need to set that date for that flow meeting. Yep. So I'd say by the end of the week, we'll pick something. Yeah. I think.
The 11th is Monday, 12th is Tuesday.
12th is what we're kind of looking at right now.
The 11th is a holiday.
11th is Veterans Day, and the 12th is Election Day. But
And I'm gone that.
I think so. Oh, it is? Oh, the 5th? Oh. I don't know.
I'm gone.
We can figure that out.
Yeah, 12th and 13th,
I'm gone that week.
just said 2 full days of trials.
Okay. We need to figure out kind of when flow is going to be ready for that, and then we'll send out a couple of possibilities, and then we'll hopefully come up with something that works. Okay. With nothing else, I'll say meeting adjourned.
Yay.